Everyone sells eventually. The only question is how much pain it takes before they do. He said it like a man who had broken people before, like he enjoyed it. Madison Carter stood in the wreckage of everything her father ever built, shattered glass, destroyed equipment, customer vehicles torn apart, and felt something shift inside her chest. Not grief, not fear, something colder, something that said not this time. If this story hits something real inside you, subscribe to this channel, drop your city in the comments, and stay until the very last word. Let's find out how far this story can travel. Madison Carter had been waking up before sunrise since she was 12 years old. Back then, she used to wake up early because her father needed help. He would already be in the garage by 4:30 in the morning, moving around in the dark, organizing tools that didn't need organizing, checking on cars that he had already checked on the night before. Her father, Robert Carter, was not the kind of man who could stay still. He was the kind of man who believed that if your hands weren't working, your mind was worrying. And worrying, he always said, was just fear wearing a suit. So he worked instead, and Madison worked beside him. By the time she was 15, she could diagnose an engine problem by sound alone. By the time she was 18, she had rebuilt a 1969 Chevy Camaro from almost nothing, piece by piece, weekend after weekend, until it ran smoother than the day it rolled off the factory floor. Her father had stood back and looked at that car with his hands on his hips and that quiet expression he reserved for moments that mattered. And he said, "You didn't just fix that car, Maddie, you understood it." She didn't know what he meant then. She understood it now. Carter's classic auto repair sat on the edge of Silver Creek, Colorado population, just under 8,000 people, the kind of town where everybody knew your name and a few people knew your business a little too well. The garage had a wooden sign above the entrance that Robert Carter had painted himself the year he opened it. The letters were slightly uneven because he had done it freehand, and Madison had once offered to have it repainted properly, and he had looked at her like she had suggested tearing down the whole building. "Imperfect things have a story," he said. "Perfect things are just expensive." That sign was still hanging there on the morning Madison turned 29. Robert Carter had been gone for 3 years by then, a heart attack sudden and without warning, the kind that doesn't give a man time to say the things he still needed to say. Madison had been in the middle of an oil change when her phone rang, and by the time she drove to the hospital, she was already too late. She stood in that hospital hallway for a long time before she cried. And when she finally did cry, she cried not for what she had lost, but for what she hadn't known she still needed. There were so many questions she had never asked him, so many stories she had assumed she still had time to hear. The garage went to her in the will. Everything else was simple. The garage was the only thing that mattered anyway. She had thought about selling it. Not seriously, just in the way you think about things at 3 in the morning when grief has made you practical and numb. But every time the thought surfaced, something inside her pushed back. This was the place where she had learned to work, where she had learned to listen, where she had learned that people trusted you not because of what you said, but because of what you did day after day without anyone watching. So she stayed. She painted the walls herself. She bought new equipment with money she didn't really have. She kept her father's pricing structure, which meant she charged people what the work was worth rather than what the market could bear, which also meant she wasn't getting rich, but she was sleeping fine at night. Silver Creek trusted her. Not because she was Robert Carter's daughter. Not at first anyway. They trusted her because she showed up. Because she was honest when something was wrong and honest when something could wait. Because she didn't talk down to people who didn't know cars, and she didn't overcharge people who did. Because when old Mrs. Hendricks brought in her 2003 Ford Taurus with a transmission problem that would have cost more to fix than the car was worth, Madison sat down with her and explained exactly what was happening and told her the truth about what made sense financially, even though the honest answer meant less money in Madison's pocket. That was how Robert Carter had done it. That was how Carter's classic auto repair had survived for 22 years in a town that had watched 2 other garages close. So when everything fell apart, it didn't fall apart because Madison had done something wrong. It fell apart because she owned something someone else wanted. The first time she saw Victor Hayes, she didn't know who he was. She was underneath a Dodge Ram pickup working on a brake line when she heard footsteps on the garage floor. Not the shuffling footsteps of a customer who wasn't sure they were in the right place. Purposeful footsteps. The kind that belonged to someone who had already decided the outcome of whatever conversation was about to happen. She rolled out from under the truck and stood up, wiping her hands on her work cloth. He was maybe 50, maybe a little older. Expensive clothes, the kind that were designed to look casual but weren't. Salt and pepper hair, clean and styled. He had the kind of face that had probably been handsome once and had moved into something more calculating with age. He stood in the center of her garage like he was already measuring the space for something else. Two men stood behind him. They didn't look like assistants. Madison Carterman, he said. That's me, she said. Victor Hayes, he didn't offer his hand. Hayes Development Group. She had heard the name. Most people in Silver Creek had by that point. Victor Hayes had been buying up commercial property across northern Colorado for the past 2 years. A strip mall in Pueblo. A shopping center outside Denver. There had been articles in the regional business press about his plans for expansion. The kind of articles that used words like revitalization and economic development and never quite mentioned the people who had to move to make room for the revitalization. What can I do for you, she said. I'm going to be straightforward with you, he said, which was the thing people said right before they weren't. This property is in an excellent location. The commercial corridor on this stretch of highway is going to develop significantly over the next 5 years. I'd like to make you an offer for the building and the land. Madison looked at him. Then she looked at the two men behind him. Then she looked back at him. It's not for sale, she said. Something shifted in his expression. Just slightly, the way a thermostat adjusts when the temperature drops. I haven't told you the number yet, he said. Doesn't matter, she said. This is my father's garage. It's not for sale. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Everything has a price, Miss Carter. I find it's usually just a question of what it takes to get someone to the conversation. He looked around the garage again. Think about it. I'll be back. He left without waiting for her response. His men followed him out. Madison stood in the middle of the garage, hands on her work cloth, and listened to the car pull away. She didn't think about it much after that. Not right away. People had approached her about the property before, mostly commercial real estate agents, and she had said no, and they had moved on. That was how it usually worked. You said no, and people accepted it because in the normal world, no was a complete answer. She didn't know yet that Victor Hayes did not operate in the normal world. She didn't know yet that for him, no was just the beginning of the negotiation. She noticed it 2 weeks later. Her parts supplier, a company she had worked with for 4 years, called to tell her that her account had been flagged for review and that all deliveries were suspended pending an audit. An audit, she said. Why, I've never been late on a payment. I understand, Miss Carter. It's a routine review. It could take 2 to 3 weeks. I have cars on my floor right now that I need parts for. I understand. We apologize for the inconvenience. She hung up and tried her secondary supplier. They told her their warehouse near Silver Creek was temporarily out of her most common inventory items. She tried a third supplier. They said they could help her, but their delivery time to her area had recently extended to 3 to 4 weeks. She frowned at her phone, so it was odd. All 3 in the same week, probably a coincidence. She found parts through a regional contact, paid extra for rush delivery, and got the cars out on schedule. The following Monday, 2 of her oldest customers called to cancel standing appointments they had kept for years. No real explanation, just that they were trying somewhere new. One of them sounded uncomfortable, like he was reading from something. She shook it off. People changed routines. But then the bank called. Her business account, the same account she had held for 6 years without a single issue, had been flagged for a compliance review. No specifics, just that there were questions about recent transaction patterns. Could she come in and speak with someone? She went in on a Wednesday morning. The meeting lasted 45 minutes and accomplished nothing. The bank officer was polite and evasive and told her the review would take some time and that her account would remain in good standing in the meantime. When she asked what had triggered the review, he looked at his screen and then looked at her and said, I'm not able to provide that specific information. She drove back to the garage with a slow, cold feeling beginning to move through her chest. Something was happening. It wasn't random. The parts suppliers, the customers, the bank. 3 different pressure points all pressing at the same time, all within the same 2-week window after Victor Hayes walked into her garage and told her everything had a price. She sat in her father's old office chair and looked at the walls where his photograph still hung. Old cars, old customers. 2 generations of people whose trucks and sedans and motorcycles had been through that garage. "What do I do?" she said to no one. The photographs didn't answer. But the thing her father had told her 100 times did rise up clear and steady. "You keep working, no matter what. You keep working." So she did. The night everything changed, she was alone in the garage until almost 10. She had been trying to get ahead on a backlog that was building because of the parts delays. There was a 1987 Ford F-150 restoration that a customer had been patient about for longer than he should have had to be. She was determined to have it done by the end of the week. She had just turned off the air compressor and was walking toward the back to lock up when she heard something. The front door. She stopped. The door was locked. She had locked it herself at 7. She had checked it twice. The sound came again. Not knocking, not the jiggle of someone checking the handle. The sound of the lock giving way. She stepped back toward the workbench, reached for her phone. 3 men came through the front door, then 2 more through the side entrance. The one who came through the front first looked at her with an expression that had no anger in it, no emotion at all, which was somehow worse than anger. "Ms. Carter," he said, "don't make this more complicated than it needs to be." "Get out of my garage," she said. She had the phone in her hand. She started to dial. The man shook his head slightly. "We just need 5 minutes, then we'll leave." She backed against the workbench. She kept dialing. The call connected and she said the address and she said break in, and she kept her voice steady because falling apart wouldn't help anyone. The man looked at the other 4 men and nodded, and then they went to work. What happened in the next 5 minutes was systematic, methodical. It was not the destruction of vandals who wanted chaos. It was the destruction of people who wanted a message delivered clearly. The diagnostic equipment came down. The floor jacks were disabled. The tool cabinets were overturned. Customer vehicles were damaged in targeted ways, not destroyed, just violated. Enough to create liability, enough to create panic. She stood with her back against the wall and watched it happen and couldn't stop it because the choice was between her body and her garage, and the cold calculating part of her brain understood that a body was harder to replace. When they finished, the man who had spoken to her walked to the door and turned back. He looked at her with that same flat expression. "Mr. Hayes asked me to tell you that this is a courtesy," he said. "He hopes it helps clarify his interest in working with you." And then they were gone. She stood in the wreckage for a long moment. Then she sat down on the floor, not because her legs gave out, because sitting felt like the only honest response to what had just happened. The police arrived in 12 minutes. She had already called 3 times. Detective Ryan Mitchell was not what she expected. She had expected someone brisk and procedural, someone who would take her statement and file it and tell her they would look into it and mean about 40% of that. What she got instead was a man in his mid-40s who came and looked around the garage for 2 full minutes without saying anything, and then sat down across from her with a notepad and looked at her with an expression that said he understood the weight of what he was looking at. "Tell me everything," he said. "Start with Hayes." She did. She told him about the first visit, the offer, the refusal, the parts suppliers, the bank, the customers who had canceled, and then the 5 men and the 5 minutes and the methodical way they had turned her father's work into rubble. Mitchell wrote steadily. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he looked at his notes and then back at her. "You said Hayes told you everything has a price," he said. His words. "Exactly. And his men told you this was a courtesy." Verbatim. Mitchell sat back. Something moved through his expression. Not surprise, recognition. "I've seen this before," he said quietly. Then more carefully, "Not Victor Hayes specifically, but this approach, this pattern." She looked at him. "What does that mean?" "It means this isn't the first time something like this has happened somewhere in this region. There are cases not fully connected yet, not officially, but there are cases." He paused. "I want to be honest with you, Miss Carter. Building a case against someone like Hayes takes time. He doesn't leave obvious fingerprints. Everything comes through intermediaries. The men who came here tonight, do you recognize any of them?" "No. They probably don't have a direct connection to Hayes on paper." He looked at her steadily. "Which means right now, tonight, we can document the break-in and the damage. But connecting it to Hayes is a longer road. So what do I do in the meantime?" Mitchell met her eyes. "You stay open," he said. You keep the lights on, because the moment you close, you give him exactly what he wants. She looked at the overturned tool cabinets, the shattered diagnostic screen, the customer vehicles with their deflated tires and cracked windshields. I don't have equipment, she said. Then you get equipment. I don't have money to replace what they just destroyed. Then you find another way. He stood. He picked up his notepad. I know that's not what you want to hear right now. No, she said, it really isn't. He paused at the door. Miss Carter, what they did tonight wasn't random. It was targeted. That means they want you afraid. The best thing you can do right now, the most effective thing, is to not be. He left. She sat in the wreckage of her father's garage until 2 in the morning, and then she stood up. She picked up the first overturned tool cabinet herself, because her father's voice was somewhere in the back of her skull, and it was saying the same thing it had always said: you keep working, no matter what. Hot damn. The next morning she opened at 6. There were no customers. She spent the morning cleaning the garage by herself, writing what she could write, salvaging what could be salvaged. She worked in silence. Her hands were scraped and her back ached from sleeping in the office chair for 2 hours before dawn, but the work felt important. Not because it fixed everything, because it said something to anyone who was watching. I'm still here. She called 3 regular customers to explain what had happened and apologize for any inconvenience to their vehicles. 2 of them were sympathetic and said they would wait. The third, a man named Dale, who had brought his truck to her father for 15 years, said something that she turned over in her mind for the rest of the day. He said, Maddie, I got a call yesterday morning. Someone told me you were having money problems and that the garage might be shutting down. I didn't know whether to believe it or not. She went very still. Who called you? She said. I didn't recognize the number, he said. When I called it back, it was disconnected. She thanked him and hung up. So it wasn't just physical. They were calling her customers, spreading stories, creating the narrative that Carter's classic auto repair was already dying, so that when it did die, it would look inevitable rather than deliberate. Victor Hayes wasn't just pressuring her. He was building a version of events where she had failed on her own. The cold feeling in her chest got colder. She went back to work. But that evening, she sat in the office and looked at the numbers, and for the first time since her father died, she allowed herself to understand the shape of the things she was facing. The parts delays cost her time and money she didn't have. The bank review meant she couldn't access emergency funds. The customer cancellations and the rumor campaign meant her income was being strangled at the source. And the damaged customer vehicles meant potential liability claims that could accelerate every other problem. She had maybe 6 weeks before the math became impossible. 6 weeks before she would have no choice but to sell. She put her head in her hands. She sat there in the dark of her father's office in the chair her father had sat in for 22 years, and she did something she hadn't done since the night he died. She cried, not because she was giving up, because she needed to feel the full weight of it before she could decide how to carry it. She allowed herself 20 minutes. Then she wiped her face, turned on the light, and started making calls. She called every supplier she had ever worked with. She called former customers she hadn't spoken to in years. She called the Chamber of Commerce and the local paper and her insurance company and every person whose number was in her father's old contacts book. She worked the phone the way she worked on engines, methodically, persistently, without expecting any single call to solve everything. Most of them were sympathetic. A few were more than sympathetic. The local paper agreed to run a piece about the garage's history and what had happened. 2 former customers showed up the next morning and helped her move equipment. A retired mechanic named Frank, who had worked briefly for her father years ago, came in and offered 3 weeks of his time free of charge while she got back on her feet. Your dad gave me a job when I needed one, Frank said simply. Consider this return. It was enough to keep her functional. Barely, but Hayes wasn't finished. The next week, a county zoning officer appeared and informed her that her garage was being reviewed for a potential code violation related to fluid disposal practices. She had never had a violation. Her disposal records were meticulous. But the review required an inspection that took 2 days and generated paperwork that occupied another day, all time she couldn't afford. The week after that, a local news website, not the established paper, but one of the newer sites that had appeared in the last year, published an article claiming that Carter's Classic Auto Repair had been cited for overcharging elderly customers. The article was vague and sourced only to anonymous complaints. There were no names, No specifics, just the allegation and the implication. She demanded a retraction. The site's editor, a man she had never met, told her that the article was based on information received from multiple independent sources and that he stood by it. She pulled the article up on her phone and read it again and understood something she had not fully understood before. Victor Hayes was not just wealthy, he was organized. He had thought this through. He had resources she could not match and patience she could not outlast, and he was using both of them to grind her down in ways that were each individually deniable, but collectively devastating. She was fighting a war on 6 fronts simultaneously, and she was fighting it alone. She was 3 weeks in when Jack Callahan walked through her door. She almost didn't notice him at first. She was elbow deep in a transmission rebuild, focused trying to ignore the fact that 2 customers had called that morning to say they had seen the article online and wanted to know if it was true. She had heard footsteps and assumed it was Frank. But Frank's steps were lighter. These footsteps were slower, more deliberate. The footsteps of a man who had been walking a long time and had learned to take the ground seriously. She wiped her hands and turned around. He was standing just inside the garage entrance. Not the way Victor Hayes had stood, not in the center, not like he owned the place. He was standing near the door, hands loose at his sides, looking at the space with an expression that was hard to read. It wasn't sympathy exactly. It was something more like recognition. He was older, mid-60s maybe, silver hair, cut close gray beard that had been growing for a while without being neglected. He wore a worn black leather vest over a dark shirt, and the vest had patches on it that she didn't immediately look at closely. What she noticed first was his eyes, clear and dark and attentive, in the way of someone who had learned to pay attention because the cost of not paying attention had once been too high. "Morning," he said. His voice was even and unhurried. "Morning," she said. "Can I help you?" "Probably." He looked at her and then at the transmission turned on the workbench. "I've got a 72 Harley shovelhead that needs some attention. Heard this was the place to bring something that matters." She tilted her head slightly. "Who told you that?" "Word gets around," he said. "You're Robert Carter's daughter." She straightened. "You knew my father." "Knew him," he said. "Long time ago. He did some work for me when I was passing through. I was having troubles with my bike and 3 other shops had turned me away." He paused. "He didn't." She looked at him for a moment. "What's your name?" she said. "Jack," he said. "Jack Callahan." She nodded slowly. She gestured at the bay beside her. "Bring the bike by tomorrow morning," she said. "I'll take a look." He nodded. He started to turn, then stopped. He looked at the garage, at the replaced windows still fresh, at the new scratches in the concrete floor that hadn't been there before, that no amount of cleaning could quite remove. "Rough stretch," he said. She kept her voice neutral. "We're managing." He looked at her with those clear dark eyes. "Your father used to say the same thing," he said. "Right before he fixed a problem most people thought was too far gone. He left." She turned back to the transmission. But she stood there for a moment without working, because something in the way Jack Callahan had looked at the garage, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with the expression of a man who was cataloging information he intended to use, had unsettled her in a way she couldn't quite name. She didn't know yet what that expression meant. She would figure it out soon enough. Jack came back the next morning with the Harley as promised. The bike was in remarkable shape for its age, which told her immediately that he cared about it the way her father had cared about the Camaro. Not because it was valuable, but because it was his and it deserved to be taken seriously. She diagnosed the problem quickly. A carburetor issue compounded by some ignition timing wear. Not critical, but the kind of thing that would become critical if ignored. 2 days, she told him, maybe less. "No rush," he said. He settled into the chair near the entrance, not in her way, not demanding anything, and picked up a magazine from the stack she kept there. She went back to work. By noon, she had almost forgotten he was there, which was unusual because she typically had a strong awareness of people in her space. But Jack Callahan had a quality of stillness that made him easy to stop registering. He didn't speak unless spoken to. He didn't use his phone constantly. He just sat there reading, occasionally glancing around the garage with that same cataloging expression. Around 1 o'clock, Frank came in with coffee and stopped short when he saw Jack. The 2 men looked at each other. Something passed between them that Madison didn't quite catch. "Jack," Frank said. His voice was careful. "Frank," Jack said. Same tone. Madison looked between them. You two know each other. Frank set the coffee down. From around, he said, which was the kind of answer that wasn't an answer. She looked at Jack. He was looking at the magazine again. She filed it away. The carburetor work was done by the next afternoon. Jack came back, paid her what she asked without negotiating, and started his bike. He listened to the engine for 30 seconds with the focused attention of someone who spoke the language. Then he turned it off and looked at her. Good work, he said, not in the way people said it when they were being polite, in the way someone said it when they meant it specifically. Thanks, she said. He didn't leave. He looked at the garage again, then at her. You're under pressure, he said, not a question. She considered deflecting, but something about the directness of it made deflection feel dishonest. Yes, she said. Victor Hayes, he said. She went still. How do you know that name? Small town, he said. And not the first time that name's come up in conversation with people who shouldn't have had to hear it. She watched him carefully. What does that mean, she said. He met her eyes. It means I've been in Silver Creek for 3 weeks, he said, and I've been listening. A silence stretched between them. Why, she said. He looked at the garage sign, the one her father had painted with the slightly uneven letters. Because your father helped me once when I needed it, he said, and some debts take a long time to find the right moment to pay. She stared at him. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know what any of it meant yet. But standing in her father's garage in the middle of the worst 3 weeks of her professional life, something about Jack Callahan's steady certainty felt like the first solid thing she had stood on in a very long time. I don't need someone to fight my battles for me, she said. I know, he said. Robert didn't raise someone who did. He put on his jacket. I'll be back next week, he said. Bike'll need another look. He walked out. She stood in the middle of the garage in the afternoon light and felt the silence settle around her. Outside, the Harley started up. The sound of it was deep and steady and unhurried. Then it faded, and Madison Carter turned back to the work, because that was what she knew how to do, and because somewhere at the very back of her mind, below all the exhaustion and the fear and the math that wasn't adding up, something had shifted, just slightly, like the first sound of an engine turning over after a long time in the cold. Not running yet, but close. Jack came back on a Tuesday. Madison was on the phone with her insurance adjuster when she heard the Harley pull up. She recognized the sound immediately, that particular deep, unhurried rumble that didn't apologize for itself. She held up one finger to no one in particular and kept listening to the adjuster explain for the third time why the claim for the damaged customer vehicles was still under review. How much longer, she said. These things take time, Ms. Carter. There are questions about the nature of the incident. The nature of the incident, she repeated slowly, is that 5 men broke into my garage and deliberately damaged 4 vehicles belonging to my customers. I have a police report. I have security footage. I don't understand what the question is. A pause. The footage is being reviewed by our team. It's been reviewed by the police. It's been reviewed by a detective. The question is why your company is sitting on a legitimate claim while my customers are driving rental cars they're paying for out of pocket. Another pause. Longer this time. I'll escalate this to my supervisor, the adjuster finally said. Thank you, she said. I'll be calling back tomorrow. She hung up and turned around. Jack was standing just inside the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets, watching her with that same steady expression. Adjuster, he said. 4th call this week, she said. They're stalling. He nodded slowly. You push them hard like that every time. Every time, she said. My customers shouldn't be waiting. Something moved in his expression. Approval maybe, or recognition. Bike doing all right, she asked. Running fine, he said. I actually came by to return something. He reached into his jacket and set a folded paper on the workbench. I found this in the saddlebag. Looks like it slipped out of one of your father's old manuals. Thought you might want it back. She picked up the paper and unfolded it. It was a photograph. Old, slightly faded at the edges. It showed a much younger version of her father. She could tell by the set of his jaw, the same jaw she saw in her own mirror, standing beside a motorcycle she didn't recognize. Next to him was a young man with dark hair and a jacket with patches she couldn't quite read clearly. She looked up at Jack. He was watching her. Where did you get this? She said. Like I said, saddlebag. She looked at the photograph again, then back at him. That's you, she said. It wasn't a question. He didn't confirm it. He didn't deny it. Your father helped me out of a situation once, he said. I wasn't in a good place. He didn't ask questions. He just helped. He looked at the photograph in her hands. Some things you don't forget. She set the photograph down carefully. Jack, she said. Oh, who are you actually? He held her gaze for a moment. Someone who keeps his word, he said. That's all you need to know right now. He turned toward the door. The insurance company is stalling because someone called them, he said without turning around. Same someone who called your suppliers and your bank. They're not confused about your claim. They've been told to slow it down. She stared at his back. How do you know that? She said. He stopped at the door. Because I made a few calls of my own, he said, and people tend to tell me things. He walked out. She stood there with the photograph in her hand and felt the ground beneath her shift in a way she couldn't explain. 3 days later, the insurance company called back. Not the adjuster, the regional supervisor. He was apologetic and brisk and told her that the claim had been approved and that payment for the damaged customer vehicles would be processed within 48 hours. When she asked what had changed, he said only that a review of the claim had determined it was straightforward and that there had been an internal processing delay for which he personally apologized. She thanked him and hung up. Then she sat down and stared at the wall. Victor Hayes had reached into her insurance company. She was certain of it now, the same way he had reached into her suppliers, her bank, her customers. Long fingers pressing everywhere, squeezing everything. And then Jack had called someone, and the pressure had stopped. In that one place, just like a valve turning. She picked up her phone to call Jack, then realized she didn't have his number. She didn't know where he was staying. She didn't know his last name. She knew a first name, a motorcycle, a leather vest, and a photograph from 30 years ago. She went back to work. But her mind kept circling the same question, the way an engine circles a problem it can't quite clear. Who was Jack Callahan? Frank came in that Friday and she asked him directly. Frank was at the coffee maker in the corner, his back to her, and she watched the slight stiffening of his shoulders when she said Jack's name. You know who he is, she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a fact. Frank turned around. He held his mug with both hands and looked at her with the expression of a man choosing his words carefully. I know of him, Frank said. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed, it's not. She waited. Frank set down his coffee. He pulled up a stool and sat down, which meant this was going to take a moment. 20 years ago, Frank said, maybe 25, there was a man in this part of Colorado who had a reputation. Not for trouble exactly, more for balance. You understand, when something was wrong and the normal channels weren't fixing it, people would talk to this man, and then things would get fixed. She listened without speaking. He wasn't a criminal, Frank said carefully. Or he wasn't just that, he had a code. People who crossed the code, people who hurt civilians, people who preyed on the weak people, who used money to squeeze out the people who couldn't fight back, they were the ones who had a problem with him. Everyone else he left alone. Jack, she said. Frank looked at his coffee. I'm not confirming in any names, he said. I'm just telling you what I know. He paused. What I know is that the man I'm describing had a lot of respect from a lot of different directions. And when that man decided someone was worth protecting, Frank stopped. He shook his head slightly. It changed the math. What does that mean? Change the math. It means the people doing the harm had to calculate something they hadn't calculated before, Frank said. They had to decide if what they were after was worth what it was going to cost them. He looked at her, and usually it wasn't. She absorbed that. What's on the vest, Frank? She said. Frank met her eyes. He held the look for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, you already know. You're just waiting for someone to confirm it. He picked up his coffee and went to work. Darn. She looked it up that night, sat in her father's office chair, laptop open, and spent 2 hours reading. The Hells Angels Motorcycle Club was one of the most documented and most misunderstood organizations in American history, depending on who was doing the writing. Law enforcement described it one way. Journalists described it another way. Members described it in a third way entirely, and the three descriptions shared so little common ground that they might as well have been describing different things. What was consistent across all three versions was this: the respect was real, the loyalty was real, the code was real, and the consequences for violating that code, for harming people who were under the protection of that code, were also very real. She closed the laptop. She sat in the dark for a while. Then she thought about Jack sitting quietly in her garage for 3 days while she worked, the way he had looked at the space, the way Frank had gone still when she said his name, the photograph of him and her father, 30-something years old, standing next to that motorcycle. Her father had helped Jack when nobody else would. She thought about that. Her father had never told her that story. He had told her 100 other stories about people he had helped over the years: the single mother whose car he fixed for free, the veteran whose truck had blown a gasket and who had paid him back over 6 months, the teenager he had caught trying to steal parts and had given a job instead. He told her those stories because he wanted her to understand that the work was about more than the work. But he hadn't told her about Jack. Maybe because some things you kept close. Maybe because some debts were private. Or maybe because he had known that someday she might need to meet Jack Callahan, and he had wanted that meeting to happen naturally. She shook her head at herself. She was getting philosophical at midnight in a garage office, which was a sign she needed sleep. But before she turned off the light, she looked at the photograph she had set on the desk. Her father, young and certain, standing beside a man who had come back 30 years later to pay a debt. "What did you know, Dad?" she said quietly. No answer, just the sound of the building settling around her. Victor Hayes came back personally on a Thursday morning. She was underneath a Subaru Outback when she heard the footsteps. Different footsteps this time, fewer of them. Just one set, actually, and they moved with the particular rhythm of a man who was accustomed to arriving places and finding those places organized to his satisfaction. She rolled out and stood up. He was alone this time. No men behind him. Just Victor Hayes in a charcoal blazer, looking around the garage with an expression that was almost academic, like he was evaluating a demolition site. "Ms. Carter," he said. "Mr. Hayes," she said. She kept her voice level. She was proud of that. "You've made some repairs," he observed. That took determination. "Was that supposed to discourage me?" she said. "The men you sent, was that supposed to make me afraid?" He looked at her calmly. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Right," she said. "The men who broke in and destroyed my equipment and damaged my customers' vehicles and had a very specific message from you, that you don't know what I'm referring to." "I had nothing to do with any break-in," he said, "and I'd be careful about making accusations you can't substantiate." She held his gaze. "I've talked to the police," she said. "There's a detective who's very interested in the pattern of what's been happening to this garage." Something moved behind his eyes, just briefly. "I'm sure the police take all reports seriously," he said. "As they should." He looked around the garage again, then back at her. "I came by to make a new offer, a substantially improved offer. Given the difficulties you've been experiencing, I thought it might be the right time to revisit the conversation." She stared at him. The audacity of it was so complete that for a moment she lost the capacity for words. He had sent men to break her equipment. He had called her suppliers and her bank and her insurance company. He had planted rumors in her community. He had spent weeks systematically destroying everything she had built. And now he was standing in her garage calling it difficulties she'd been experiencing and offering her money like he was doing her a favor. "Get out of my garage," she said. His expression didn't change. "The offer won't stay on the table indefinitely," he said. "Get out of my wedding garage." He held the look for a moment longer. That flat, calculating look that she was beginning to understand was his version of a threat. Then he turned and walked out. She waited until she heard his car pull away. Then she picked up a wrench from the workbench and held it in both hands and breathed. In, out, in, out. She set the wrench down. She picked up her phone and called Detective Mitchell. "He came back," she said, "in person, alone, said he didn't know anything about the break-in, called the damage difficulties I've been experiencing, and made a new offer." A pause. "That's interesting," Mitchell said. "Is it useful?" "It tells me he's getting impatient," Mitchell said. "People like Hayes don't usually do personal visits when things are going to their plan. They make personal visits when something isn't going to plan." "Something isn't going to his plan," she said. It wasn't a question. Not entirely, Mitchell said carefully. I can't say more than that right now. She stood there processing that. Mitchell, she said, what is happening on your end? A pause. I'm building something, he said, carefully. I need you to stay open, stay visible, and document everything. If he came to you directly today, write it down. Paint what he said, exact words, if you can remember them. I remember them, she said. Good, Mitchell said. Write them down anyway. He hung up. She stood in the middle of the garage and thought about what he had said. Something isn't going to his plan. She thought about the insurance company calling back. She thought about Frank going quiet at Jack's name. She thought about the fact that 3 of her parts suppliers had called in the last week unprompted to say that their account reviews had been resolved and they were ready to fulfill orders. One supplier calling to say a review was resolved, that was normal. That happened. 3 in the same week, that wasn't normal. She pulled out her phone. She had Jack's number now. He had given it to her casually at the end of last week, the way you might give someone your number in case they needed to reschedule an appointment. She had put it in her phone without making a big deal of it. She stared at it for a long moment. Then she called. He picked up on the second ring. Jack, she said, Victor Hayes came to my garage today, in person, and I think I need to understand what's been happening because 3 of my suppliers called this week to say their reviews were resolved and my insurance claim got approved after 4 weeks of being stalled, and I don't think any of that is a coincidence. And I think you know that, and I think you owe me the truth. A pause. You still at the garage, he said. Yes. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Man. He sat across from her at the workbench, both of them with coffee, the late afternoon light coming through the repaired windows. He was quiet for a moment before he spoke, the kind of quiet that wasn't hesitation, more like organization, like he was deciding where to start. Your father repaired my motorcycle 31 years ago, he said. I was 27. I was passing through Silver Creek heading west. The bike threw a chain at the worst possible moment, and I ended up on the side of the highway with $200 to my name and a bike I couldn't ride. She listened. I walked into town and tried 3 shops. First 2 took one look at my vest and told me they were full up. They weren't. Third one was a Saturday afternoon and the owner was closing up. He paused. Your father was the 4th shop I tried. He was sweeping out the garage and getting ready to go home. He took one look at the bike, one look at me and said, how long will you need to stay in town? Not whether he'd fix it, just how long did I need? She looked at her coffee. He had me fixed up by the next morning, Jack said. Wouldn't take full payment because he said he was practicing on a shovelhead anyway, and I'd done him a favor. A short pause. It was a lie. He was a good liar when he was being generous. She smiled despite herself. Why didn't he ever tell me that story? She said. I don't know, Jack said. Maybe he thought it wasn't his story to tell. Maybe he figured if it ever mattered, you'd hear it from me. She looked at him. Okay, she said. So you're here because of something my father did 31 years ago. And I believe that, I do. But the suppliers, the insurance, those things happen because of a phone call. One phone call. And I need to know what kind of phone call makes 3 separate companies reverse course in the same week. Jack looked at her steadily. I know people, he said. I understand that, she said. I need to know what kind of people. People who have been in situations where they needed help and who got it and who remember that, he said. People who, when I pick up a phone and tell them something isn't right, take that seriously. Because of the vest, she said. He met her eyes. Because of the vest, he confirmed, and because of 30 years of keeping my word. She sat with that for a moment or two. Hayes came back today, she said, personally with a new offer. Mitchell told me that means something's not going to plan for him. He's not used to resistance, Jack said. He buys people. He squeezes people. He waits people out. When none of that works, he gets impatient. And what does Victor Hayes do when he gets impatient? Jack looked at her. He escalates, he said. A beat of silence. Meaning what she said. Meaning what happened the first time the men he sent the equipment, that was a message. A warning. Jack's voice was level and steady and absolutely certain. If he comes back, it won't be to send a message. It'll be to finish it. The word landed in the room and stayed there. Finish it. She felt the cold thing in her chest again, the one that had been living there since the night 5 men came through her doors. So what do we do, she said. Jack wrapped both hands around your coffee mug. You keep working, he said. You stay open. You give Mitchell everything he needs. You keep being exactly what you've been being, the person who doesn't fold. He paused. And you let me handle some things. I don't like not knowing what things, she said. I know you don't, he said. But right now, the less you know specifically, the better. For you. She didn't like that. She was quiet for a moment, turning it over. My father trusted you, she said finally. Yes, Jack said. He wasn't an easy man to fool, she said. And he wasn't the kind of man who trusted people who didn't deserve it. No, Jack said. He wasn't. She exhaled. Okay, she said. Tell me what I need to do. Jack leaned back. First thing he said, you're going to call every customer who canceled and tell them you'd like to personally show them the garage is back in full operation. Don't ask them to come. Tell them you'd like to show them. There's a difference. That's direct, she said. People respond to directness. They're used to businesses apologizing and being passive. They're not used to someone looking them in the eye and saying, come see for yourself. He paused. Second thing, you're going to need a statement for the local paper, not a complaint, a statement. Something that says exactly what this business is, what it's done for this community, and where it's going. That sounds like a counter-narrative, she said. That's exactly what it is, he said. Hayes built a story that you were failing. You're going to build a different story, a true one. She nodded slowly. And the third thing, she said. He looked at her. The third thing is that you stop sleeping in the office and start going home at night, he said. You can't run a long fight on no sleep. She blinked. How did you know I was? Frank told me, he said. She made a mental note to have a conversation with Frank. You're worried about me being here alone at night, she said. He held her gaze. Yes, he said simply. Another silence. Jack, she said, what's your real concern here? What do you think Hayes is going to do? He was quiet for a long moment. He's already tried the quiet approach, Jack said. The pressure campaign, the rumors, the financial squeeze, it hasn't worked. He came here personally, which means he's frustrated. And a man like Hayes who gets frustrated, he stopped. Tell me, she said. He's going to try to make sure there's nothing left to fight over, Jack said. He's going to try to take the building out of the equation entirely. She understood exactly what he meant. The cold thing in her chest turned to ice. He's going to burn it down, she said. Jack said nothing, but the way he said nothing was its own answer. That night, she went home. She lay in bed in her apartment and stared at the ceiling and thought about her father's garage, the walls, the floors, the sign with the uneven letters, and the thought of it burning made something inside her lock up with a ferocity that has surprised even her. She was not going to let that happen. She didn't know yet exactly how she was going to stop it, but she was not going to let that happen. She picked up her phone and called Mitchell. Jack thinks Hayes is going to move on the building itself, she said without preamble. Destroy it. Make sure there's nothing to come back to. A pause. Tell me why he thinks that, Mitchell said. She relayed the conversation. Mitchell listened without interrupting. When she finished, the line was quiet for a long moment. He's not wrong about the pattern, Mitchell said finally. I've been looking at 3 other cases in the region, 2 properties that were under similar pressure campaigns, and then before the owners could mount any meaningful legal challenge, had fires. She sat up in bed. Fires, she said, both ruled accidental, both conveniently cleared the way for commercial development that Hayes or a Hayes affiliate was involved in. He paused. I can't prove that yet, but the pattern is there. Mitchell, she said, what do I do? What I told you before, he said. Stay open, document everything, and... He stopped. And what? Another pause. Longer. Your friend Jack, he said, the one who's been helping you. Yes. I'm not going to ask questions about that, Mitchell said carefully. What I'm going to say is if he's the kind of person who can make sure that garage isn't vulnerable on a night when I don't have enough officers to spare, that's information I don't need to know about specifically. She understood exactly what he was saying. Okay, she said. Good night, Ms. Carter. Good night, Detective. She set down the phone. She thought about what Mitchell had just told her. 2 fires, 2 properties, both accidental, both convenient. Victor Hayes had done this before. He had done it before and gotten away with it. She thought about the garage, the sign, the photographs on the office wall, 22 years of her father's work. She picked up her phone again. She called Jack. He's done this before, she said. Mitchell told me. 2 other properties, fires that were ruled accidental. Silence on the line. I know, Jack said. She went very still. You already knew, she said. Yes, he said. How long have you known? A pause. Before I walked into your garage, he said. The silence between them was different now. Charge was something she needed a moment to sort out. You came here because of my father, she said slowly, but you also came here because you already knew about Hayes. Yes, he said. Why didn't you tell me that? Because you needed to trust your own read on the situation first, he said. If I'd walked in on day 1 and told you everything, you'd have felt like you were someone else's project, and you're not. She sat with that. It made sense. It was also infuriating. So what exactly do you know about Victor Hayes, she said. Enough, he said. Enough to know this needs to end, not just for you, for the other families he's already done this to. She felt something shift in the space of that sentence, a widening. This was no longer just about her garage. It never had been. What are you going to do, she said. Make sure the right people know what's happening, he said, and make sure Hayes understands that whatever he's done before this time, the outcome is going to be different. How, she said, because this time, Jack said, he didn't do his research. What does that mean? A pause. It means he picked the wrong garage, Jack said, and the wrong family. He said it quietly, without drama, without heat, but something in those words made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Jack, she said, be careful. A short silence. Go to sleep, Madison, he said, not unkindly. Tomorrow you've got calls to make and a garage to run. He hung up. She set down the phone. She lay back on the pillow and stared at the ceiling and thought about her father standing in a garage 31 years ago looking at a young man with a broken motorcycle and a leather vest and making the decision to help without asking any questions. She thought about the kind of man it took to make that decision. She thought about the kind of world that decision had rippled into 31 years forward to this moment. People thought legacy was about what you left behind. But maybe it was also about what came back. What returned years later wearing a gray beard and a worn black vest, sitting quietly in the corner of your garage, like a man who had been waiting a long time for the right moment to keep a promise. She closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 weeks, she slept without waking. And in the dark outside the town of Silver Creek, Colorado, something was changing. Not loudly, not yet. But the way a sky changes before a storm, quietly, completely, and without any possibility of going back. She made the calls the next morning, every single one. She started at 7 before she even unlocked the garage, sitting in her car, with a coffee that had gone lukewarm and her father's old contact book open on the passenger seat beside her phone. She had gone through it the night before and put a small check mark next to every customer who had canceled, every person who had gone quiet, every long-standing relationship that had been severed in the past month by a phone call from an unknown number, and a rumor about a garage that was supposedly failing. There were 19 names. She called all 19. She didn't lead with an apology. Jack had told her not to, and she had thought about it long enough overnight to agree with him. An apology put her in a position of weakness when she had done nothing wrong. What she led with instead was honesty. This is Madison Carter, she said the same way every time, the same steady tone. I'm calling because I know you heard something about the garage that concerned you. I want to tell you directly what actually happened and where we stand right now. If you have 5 minutes, I'd like you to hear it from me. Most of them had 5 minutes. She was direct. She told them about the break-in. She told them about the pressure campaign. She didn't name Victor Hayes specifically. Mitchell had advised against it, but she described what had happened with enough clarity that anyone paying attention could draw their own conclusions. She told them the insurance claims had been resolved. She told them the equipment was repaired. She told them Carter's classic auto repair was open operational and was not going anywhere. By the end of the morning, 11 of the 19 had rescheduled. By the end of the day, 15. She stood at the workbench at 5:30 and looked at the appointment calendar and felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Not relief exactly, more like the particular sensation of ground returning underfoot after a long time of not being sure where you were stepping. Frank walked past and looked at the calendar over her shoulder. 15, he said. 15, she confirmed. He nodded without saying anything else, just nodded and went back to what he was doing. But she caught the expression on his face before he turned, and it was the expression of a man who had been around long enough to know that 15 appointments rescheduled in a single day wasn't administrative recovery. It was a statement. Jack came by that evening after the garage closed. He didn't knock. She had stopped expecting him to. He just appeared in the entrance the way he always did, deliberate, unhurried, like a man who had calculated exactly how much space he should occupy in a room and had chosen a number slightly smaller than most people would. How many, he said. 15, she said. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then good. The paper wants to run the piece on Saturday, she said. Front page of the local section. The editor called me this afternoon. What did you tell them? That I'd give them a full interview tomorrow morning. She paused. Was that right? Yes, he said. Tell them the truth, all of it. Not just what happened to the garage. Tell them about your father. Tell them what this place means. Let people remember why they cared about it in the first place. She looked at him. You're good at this, she said. The strategy of it. He shrugged slightly. I've watched enough people fight battles to know what works and what doesn't. And what doesn't work, she said. Trying to out-resource someone who has more resources than you, he said. You can't beat Hayes on his own terms. He has more money, more connections, more legal cover. You beat him on different terms. You make the fight about something he can't buy. He met her eyes. Community, truth, loyalty. Those things can't be purchased. They have to be earned. And Hayes has never had to earn anything. She thought about that. Mitchell called me this afternoon too, she said. Something shifted in Jack's expression. Subtle. Attentive. What did he say? He said the investigation is moving. He didn't say how far or toward what exactly, but he said, and these were his exact words, that the pattern is getting cleaner. She paused. He also said Hayes filed a complaint with the city this week. Claims the garage has been operating vehicles on public roads without proper clearance documentation. Jack's jaw tightened slightly. It's not true, she said. Every vehicle that's left this garage has been fully documented. I know it's not true, Jack said. That's not the point. He's not trying to win the complaint. He's trying to create a paper trail that looks like a legitimate dispute. In case this ends up in front of a judge, he wants it to look like a business conflict rather than a predatory campaign. She stared at him. He's preparing his defense, she said. Before he's even been charged, Jack said. The coldness was back in her chest. He's done this before, she said again. Not because she had forgotten, because saying it out loud helped her hold the full weight of it. He's done it 4 times in 5 years, Jack said. She looked at him. 4, she said. That I know of, he said. She let that settle. The 2 fires Mitchell mentioned, she said. Those were 2 of the 4. Yes. What happened to the other 2? Jack's expression was steady, but something moved behind his eyes. Something that looked older than the conversation. One sold, he said. Eventually, after 6 months of what you've been through. He paused. The other held out longer. Hayes got more aggressive. The owner had a health event, heart attack. He sold from the hospital bed. The garage was very quiet. Did Hayes cause the heart attack? She said. Stress caused the heart attack, Jack said. Hayes caused the stress. She turned away for a moment. She needed a second to breathe through what she was feeling, which was something complex and hot that sat somewhere between grief for a person she didn't know and a focused, cold fury that she was beginning to understand was not going anywhere until this was finished. He's not going to do that to me, she said. Her voice was flat and certain. No, Jack said. He's not. The way he said it wasn't a reassurance. It was a statement of fact, the way a man stated facts he had already decided on. She turned back and looked at him. Jack, she said, what are you doing on your end? And I need more than making calls this time. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, sit down. She sat. He pulled up the other stool. There are people, he said carefully, who have an interest in seeing Victor Hayes stopped. Not just here, across the state. Some of those people are law enforcement. Some of them are business owners like you. Some of them are people who move in different circles than any of those. He paused. I have been talking to all 3 kinds. What I've been doing is connecting information that exists in separate places and making sure the right people have the right pieces. You're building a case, she said. I'm helping someone else build a case, he corrected. Mitchell is building the case. I'm making sure he has what he needs to build it. How? People talk to me, Jack said simply. People who won't talk to a detective. People who have information about Hayes that they've been sitting on because they're afraid of what talking would cost them. I've been having conversations, asking questions, reminding people that silence has its own cost. She thought about what that meant. The kinds of conversations Jack Callahan could have that Ryan Mitchell couldn't. The rooms he could walk into, the names he could say. Are you putting yourself at risk? She said. He almost smiled, just the corner of his mouth. I've been in rooms a lot more dangerous than this, he said. That's not an answer. No, he said, but it's what I've got for you right now. She exhaled. The article runs Saturday, she said. Mitchell is building a case. You're working your side of it. She looked at him. And Hayes is going to escalate. Yes, Jack said. How soon? He was quiet for a moment. I don't know exactly, he said, but I know the signs. When a man like Hayes starts making official complaints, city filings, regulatory challenges, things that create documentation, it usually means he's about to do something he wants to be buried under paperwork. He met her eyes. That move this week with the city complaint, that's the sign. So we have days, she said. Maybe less, he said. She looked at the garage around her, at the repaired windows, at the tools on the pegboard that her father had organized the same way for 20 years, at the workbench where she had spent the last 3 weeks fighting for something that should never have had to be fought for. I'm not leaving the garage unattended at night, she said. Jack said nothing for a moment. I'm not arguing about it, she said. This is my garage, my father's garage. I am not going to sit in my apartment while someone burns it down. I know, he said, and his voice was different, quieter, like he had expected this and had already accepted it. Then you won't be alone. She called Mitchell at 9 that night. Hayes filed the city complaint, she said. Jack thinks it's a sign he's about to move in on the building. A brief pause. Tell me what Jack said exactly. She did. Mitchell was quiet for a longer moment this time. He's not wrong about the pattern, Mitchell said finally. I've been looking at the timeline from the other properties. In both cases where there was a fire, there was a regulatory filing in the days before. Small things, noise complaints, zoning questions, nothing that would hold up. But they were filed. So Hayes creates a paper trail of a dispute, as she said, and then something happens to the property, and the fire department says it was electrical, and Hayes buys the land from the estate 6 months later. That's the theory, Mitchell said. And I'm closer than I've ever been to making it more than a theory. He paused. Madison, I need you to do something for me, but what? I need you to install additional security cameras. Not the ones you have, new ones, different placement. And I need you to tell no one about them except me. She understood immediately. You think someone's watching what I do with the security system, she said. I think Hayes has been one step ahead on the information side throughout this whole situation, Mitchell said. The way he knew to call your suppliers and your bank. The way the insurance got flagged the same week he came to visit. Someone has been feeding him information about your operations. She felt the cold thing spread. Someone local, she said. I don't know yet, Mitchell said. I'm not saying anyone in particular. But be careful. She hung up and sat with that for a long time. Someone local. Someone who knew her schedule. Someone who knew which supplier she used, which bank she had her account, at which insurance company carried her customer liability coverage. She went through the list of people who would know those things. It was a short list. Frank was on it. She pushed that thought aside immediately and then pulled it back because pushing it aside without examining it was exactly the kind of mistake her father had always warned her about. Trust carefully, he used to say, and then trust completely. But do the careful part first. She thought about Frank going still at Jack's name. The way the two men had looked at each other that first day. The way Frank had said from around in a tone that meant something and had never explained it further. Frank could have been placed in her garage. She hated thinking it. She thought it anyway. She called Jack. Mitchell thinks someone is feeding Hayes information, she said. Someone who knows my operations. Jack, tell me the truth. How well do you actually know Frank? A silence on the line. Frank Kowalski, Jack said slowly, has known me for 20 years. He is not the one feeding Hayes information. You're certain? I'm certain, Jack said, and there was something in his voice that settled the question completely. Frank came here because I asked him to, because I needed someone in that garage who could help and who I trusted absolutely. She absorbed that. You asked him to come, she said. Yes. Before you came yourself. Yes. She processed that timeline. Frank had been there before Jack walked in. Frank had been watching, reporting back maybe, making sure she was still standing before Jack showed up too. You weren't sure I'd still be fighting, she said. When you came in, you needed to know if it was worth showing up. A long pause. No, Jack said. I needed to know if you needed the kind of help I can give. There's a difference. He paused. Some people, when they're being squeezed like this, want to be rescued. They want someone to fix it for them. That's not the kind of help I'm good at. And other people, she said. Other people are fighting, he said. They just need someone to fight beside them. She let that sit. What did Frank tell you, she said. That you were working 16 hours a day on broken equipment, Jack said. That you were sleeping in the office. That you called 19 customers back instead of folding. That you filed a police report the same night they broke in before the glass was even swept up. A pause. That you were your father's daughter. She pressed her lips together. Okay, she said after a moment. Okay, he said. Okay, I believe you about Frank. She took a breath. So if it's not Frank, then who? That's what I'm working on, he said. It'll shake out. These things always do. He paused. Get the cameras. Don't tell anyone. Not even Frank. Not because I don't trust him, because the fewer people who know, the cleaner it is. Agreed, she said. And Madison. Yeah. Be careful who you talk to about the investigation, he said. Mitchell, too. I don't mean distrust Mitchell. I mean walls have ears. Text rather than call when you can. And assume that anything said on the garage floor could be heard by someone who shouldn't be hearing it. She looked around the garage. I hate this, she said. I know, he said. It won't last much longer. She wanted to ask him what that meant, how long, what was coming, what he knew that he still wasn't telling her. But she was beginning to understand that Jack gave information in the order and timing he judged to be most useful, not in the order she might prefer. And she was also beginning to understand against her natural instincts that his judgment about such things was probably better than hers. Good night, Jack, she said. Good night, he said. The article ran Saturday, front page of the local section, just as the editor had promised. The headline was simple: A Silver Creek Institution Fights Back. The piece ran 1,200 words. It told the story of Robert Carter founding the garage in 1991. It quoted 3 longtime customers. It described what had happened, the break-in, the pressure campaign, the supplier disruptions with enough specificity to be clear and enough care to avoid the kind of specific accusations that would put Madison at legal risk before Mitchell had finished his work. And it ended with a quote from Madison that the editor had asked for at the very close of the interview when she was tired and the recorder was still running, and she wasn't editing herself as carefully as she might have been otherwise. The editor had read it back to her before publication and asked if she wanted to change it. She had thought about it for 15 seconds. No, she had said, leave it. The quote was, my father spent 22 years proving that an honest business is worth protecting. I intend to spend at least that long proving he was right. Her phone started buzzing an hour after the paper hit doorsteps. Old customers. New customers. People she had never met who had read the article online. 2 businesses in neighboring towns who had experienced similar pressure campaigns from Hayes Development Group and had never told anyone because they hadn't known who to tell. A retired contractor named Bill Garrett who called and said he had been trying to find someone to talk to for 3 years about what Hayes had done to a family-owned lumberyard outside Pueblo. That last call lasted 45 minutes. She sat in the office with a notepad and wrote everything Bill Garrett told her because Mitchell needed to hear it, because this was exactly the kind of connective tissue the detective had been trying to build: other victims, other cases, other timelines that converged on the same man and the same methods. When she called Mitchell afterward, his voice had a quality she hadn't heard before. Focused, energized. The voice of someone who had just watched several puzzle pieces click into place simultaneously. Give me Garrett's number, he said. She gave it to him. Madison, he said. This article did something I couldn't do officially. It gave people permission to talk. What does that mean for the case? It means it's moving faster than it was yesterday, he said. Stay close, stay safe. And if anything feels off tonight or tomorrow, anything, even a car parked somewhere, it wasn't before you call me. You think he's going to move this weekend, she said. A pause. I think it's possible, Mitchell said. A man who is cornered and angry and watching his carefully built narrative fall apart in a newspaper, that's a man who stops being strategic and starts being reactive. After she hung up, she thought about that word. Reactive. A man who has spent years being methodical and controlled, being reacted into a corner until the control breaks. She thought about what broke through when control broke. Then she called Jack. The article ran, she said. 2 more victims came forward. Mitchell is moving faster, and I think Hayes is going to do something stupid very soon. Jack didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was different, not alarmed, more like a man who has been waiting for a particular signal and has just heard it. How many people were in the garage today? He asked. More than any day in the past month, she said. The parking lot was actually full this afternoon. Good, he said. Leave the lights on when you close tonight. All of them, both the inside and the outside. Why? Because empty, dark buildings are easier targets than lit ones, he said. And because I want anyone watching to see that this place is not abandoned and not afraid. Okay, she said, and Madison, don't stay in the building tonight. She started to argue. Don't stay in the building, he said again. I need you where I can. He stopped. I need to know where you are. Can you do that for me? The way he said it made her stop arguing. Yes, she said. Good. He paused. I'll be in touch. He hung up. She locked up the garage that night with all the lights blazing the way he had asked, inside and out, the old sign above the entrance, lit from below, so that Carter's Classic Auto Repair was visible from halfway down the block. She went home. She sat in her apartment and tried to watch television, and it couldn't track a single thing that was happening on the screen. At 11:30, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words, time to walk away. She stared at it. Then she screenshotted it and sent it to Mitchell and to Jack simultaneously. Mitchell responded in 2 minutes, don't respond. I'll trace it. Stay where you are. Jack responded in 30 seconds. Not with words. He sent her a single photo. It took her a moment to understand what she was looking at. Then she understood. It was a view from outside her garage. Dark street, her building lit from within. And in the frame, parked half a block down with the lights off a dark SUV. They were already there. She was on her feet before she processed the decision to stand. She called Jack. Don't come to the garage, he said immediately. They're already there. I know, he said. Madison, listen to me. Do not come to the garage right now. I need you to stay away from it. They're going to burn it down, she said. Her voice was shaking for the first time in weeks, and she hated it and couldn't stop it. No, Jack said. They're not. How can you possibly? Because they're not going to get the chance, he said, and his voice was so completely certain that it went through her like a current and silenced the shaking. Trust me, please stay where you are. She sat down on the edge of her bed. She was gripping the phone so hard her hand ached. Jack, she said, what's happening? He didn't answer, but she heard something through the phone, a sound, distant, low, a rumble that started as one and became something larger, something that built on itself and kept building, the way a sound grows when it isn't one thing anymore, but many things together. Jack, she said, what is that sound? And he said, that's the answer to the text message they sent you. She didn't stay in the apartment. She knew she had said she would. She knew Jack had asked her to. She knew Mitchell had told her to stay where she was. She was in her car in 4 minutes. She drove toward the garage at a speed that was not legal and did not care about being legal. She heard it before she saw it. She heard it 3 blocks away. The sound she had heard through the phone was not distant anymore. It was everywhere. It filled the street and the buildings around it, and the air itself a deep thrumming presence that was not noise exactly, but something more physical than noise. Something you felt in your sternum before you heard it with your ears. She turned the corner, and she stopped the car. She sat there and looked at what was in front of her, and for a long moment she could not move. Not because she was afraid, because the sight of it was so complete, so total, that her brain needed several seconds to absorb it. The entire street in front of Carter's classic auto repair was filled with motorcycles. Not a few, not a dozen. Hundreds. They came from both directions, and they lined the street and the sidewalks, and they kept coming, arriving in groups of 10 and 20, the sound of them layering on each other until the whole block vibrated with it. Men and women on bikes of every kind, old Harleys, newer machines, choppers and cruisers, and stripped-down road bikes, all of them moving into position with a calm and organized precision that was more intimidating than any chaos could have been. Because chaos was frightening. This was something else. This was a Wupper wall, a deliberate, chosen, organized wall of human beings who had driven through the night from every direction to stand in front of one small garage in one small Colorado town because someone had asked them to, and they had said yes. The dark SUV was still parked half a block down. It had not moved. She got out of her car. She pushed through the edge of the crowd. People made way for her. A few of them looked at her, and she saw recognition in their eyes. They knew who she was. They knew whose garage this was. They had come because of that specific knowledge. She found Jack near the front. He was standing in the space between the crowd and the dark SUV, arms loose at his sides, his vest catching the light from the garage windows behind him. He turned when he heard her. He looked at her with an expression that was equal parts exasperation and relief. "I told you to stay home," he said. "I know you did," she said. She stood beside him and looked at the SUV. After a long moment, the SUV's headlights came on, and then it began to move. Not forward, backward, slowly, carefully, backing away from the crowd the way you backed away from something you had misunderstood the nature of. One car length, two, three. Then it turned, and its headlights swept across the street, and it drove away into the dark. She watched it go. She heard footsteps approaching from behind her and turned. Jack's voice came quietly from beside her. "He sent 3 vehicles," he said. "The SUV you knew about, and 2 more parked on the cross streets." She looked at him. "How do you know that?" "Because they're leaving too," he said. She looked, and she saw them 2 more sets of headlights, a block in each direction, slowly retreating. The crowd behind them was quiet. Not silence exactly, but the particular quality of stillness that happens when many people simultaneously recognize that the moment they came for has passed. And then from somewhere in the back of the crowd, someone started a bike, then another, and the sound changed. It went from the waiting kind of rumble to the moving kind, deep and rhythmic and alive. And she understood they were not leaving, but settling in, spreading out, posting up in the streets around the garage like a living perimeter. She turned to Jack. "They're staying," she said. "Until morning," he said. "Maybe longer." She looked at the crowd, at the vests, at the patches, at the faces of men and women who had driven hours in the dark to stand in front of a building they had never seen before because someone they respected had made a call. "Jack," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she intended. "How many people did you call?" He thought about it. "I didn't call people," he said. "I made 1 call. Then other people made calls." He paused. "That's how it works." She thought about that. 1 call becoming 10, 10 becoming 50, 50 becoming the street full of motorcycles in front of her father's garage. "Who came?" she said. "Where are they from?" He looked at the crowd. "Colorado," he said. "Utah, New Mexico, 2 groups from Wyoming." He paused. "There's a group from Arizona that pulled in about 20 minutes ago." She stared at him. "Arizona," she said. "Your father helped someone once," he said. "That someone told someone. Some of these people never met your father, but they know the story." She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment, not because she was going to cry, because she needed to hold herself together long enough to finish understanding what she was looking at. Her father had spent 22 years helping people who needed it without asking for anything back. He had fixed bikes for men other shops turned away. He had charged people what the work was worth instead of what he could get away with. He had treated everyone who came through his door as someone whose time and money and dignity deserved respect. And now, 22 years and 3 years more, those people were standing in the street in front of his garage. From Colorado and Utah and New Mexico and Wyoming and Arizona, standing in the dark with the lights of the garage behind them, because a debt that was 31 years old had finally found its moment. She lowered her hand. My father, she said. She couldn't finish the sentence. Jack looked at her. His expression was something she had not seen on his face before. Something gentle. He knew what he was doing, Jack said. Every time he helped someone he knew. Not that it would come back to this specifically, but that things come back. He paused. Good things come back. And people who stand by other people, they stand by them. She turned to look at the garage. At the sign above the entrance, the letters slightly uneven, lit from below, burning bright in the middle of the Colorado night. And then behind her a commotion. She turned back. A vehicle had turned onto the street and was coming toward them. Not a motorcycle, a car. It moved slowly because it had to, because the street was full, and the crowd opened for it with the particular wariness of people who don't know what is coming, but are ready for whatever it is. The car stopped. The door opened. Detective Ryan Mitchell got out. He was holding his badge in one hand and his phone in the other, and he looked at the crowd, at the hundreds of bikes, at the wall of people that stretched from sidewalk to sidewalk with an expression that moved through several stages in about 3 seconds. He looked at Madison. He looked at Jack. He looked back at Madison. I told you to stay home, he said. So did he, she said, nodding at Jack. Mitchell looked at Jack for a moment. The SUVs, he said. They're heading north on Route 9. I've got a patrol car following. 3 vehicles, Jack said. Dark SUV plus 2 others on the cross streets. Mitchell looked at him. You want to tell me how you knew about the cross-street vehicles before I did? Jack said nothing. Mitchell made a sound that was not quite a laugh. I traced the text she received, Mitchell said to Madison. Burner phone. But the tower it pinged off of placed it within 4 blocks of this garage. He looked around at the crowd again. I'm going to need statements from anyone who observed vehicles or individuals near this property tonight. You'll have them? Jack said. Mitchell looked at him again. There was something complicated in that look, professional discomfort, personal respect, and a kind of pragmatic recognition that tonight the outcome he wanted had been achieved by methods that existed well outside his jurisdiction, and that he was going to need to make a principled peace with that fact. He turned to Madison. You're safe, he said. Tonight, the men Hayes sent, they're not going to come back tonight. He paused. But Madison, this gave us something. The vehicles, the positioning, the text message, the timing. Combined with what's already been built. He stopped. He looked at his phone. He looked back at her with an expression she had never seen from him before. I'm going to be making some calls in the morning. What kind of calls? She said. The kind that result in a very specific kind of paperwork, Mitchell said. The kind with a judge's signature at the bottom. She stared at him. You have enough, she said. I'm going to have enough, he said. By morning, tonight was the last piece. She turned that over. Tonight was the last piece. The vehicles sent to her garage, the text message, the documented attempt. All of it captured on new cameras that Hayes didn't know existed, positioned at angles his people hadn't anticipated, because Mitchell had asked her to put them there, and she had trusted him enough to do it without telling anyone. The trap had been set, and Victor Hayes had walked into it. She turned and looked at Jack. He was watching her with that steady, clear expression of his. She thought about the past weeks, the parts suppliers reversing course, the insurance company calling back, the customers returning, the article, the phone calls from Bill Garrett and the others, the people who had been afraid to talk suddenly talking. Every piece had been deliberate. Every piece had been moving toward this night. Jack had not just been keeping his word to a man who had helped him 31 years ago. He had been engineering something, carefully, patiently, in the way a man with 30 years of experience in situations most people never faced understood that the solution to an organized problem was an organized response. You planned this, she said, from the beginning, from the day you walked into my garage. He met her eyes. I saw what was happening, he said, and I knew what it needed. Why didn't you tell me? Because what it needed was you, he said. Your fight, your decisions, your phone calls, and your newspaper article, and your voice on the record saying this place is worth fighting for. If I had told you the whole thing from the start, it wouldn't have been your fight anymore. He paused, and it needed to be your fight, because the outcome needed to belong to you. She stood in the noise and the light and the crowd of people who had come from 4 states to stand in front of her father's garage, and she understood that the man in front of her had given her the hardest and most meaningful gift anyone had given her since her father died. He had let her fight. He had made sure she wasn't alone. But he had let her fight. She exhaled, long and slow and all the way to the bottom. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. It wasn't a dismissal. It was the nod of a man who understood that some words didn't need to be built on. Behind them, the motorcycles kept their vigil. Around them, the night held. And inside the lit windows of Carter's Classic Auto Repair, the sign that said everything swayed slightly in the night wind, slightly crooked, slightly imperfect, exactly the way her father had made it. Still standing, still there. And now, finally on the right side of the night. The motorcycles were still there at dawn. Madison knew because she had not slept. She had gone back to her apartment at Mitchell's insistence. He had walked her to her car personally, which told her how seriously he was taking the threat, even after the SUVs had retreated. But sleep had not come. She had lain in bed with her phone on the pillow beside her, watching the hours change, listening to the silence of her apartment, and thinking about the sound that had filled the street in front of her father's garage. Hundreds of motorcycles, 4 states, one phone call that became many. At 5:15, she gave up on sleep. She made coffee. She sat at her kitchen table. She called Jack at 5:30, half expecting him not to answer, expecting instead the voicemail of a man who had the good sense to sleep. He picked up on the first ring. "You're still there," she said. "Some of us are," he said. His voice sounded like a man who had also not slept, but in the particular way of someone who had chosen not to, rather than been unable to. "Patrol came through twice overnight. Nothing moved on your street. Hayes's people didn't come back." "No," he said. "They won't. Not after last night." She wrapped both hands around her coffee mug. "Mitchell said he's making calls this morning," she said. "I know," Jack said. "How do you know?" A pause. "Because I talked to him at 2 in the morning." She stared at her coffee. "You and Mitchell talked at 2 in the morning," she said slowly. "We've been talking more than you knew," Jack said, "since about the second week. He needed things I could get. I needed things he could make official. It wasn't always comfortable for either of us, but it worked." She sat with that for a moment. Mitchell and Jack, a detective and a Hells Angels legend, working the same problem from opposite ends, sharing information through a channel that didn't officially exist and never would officially exist. Her father, she thought, would have found that deeply satisfying. "What did you give him?" she said. "Names," Jack said. "Dates, locations. People I talked to who wouldn't talk to a badge, but who had been sitting on information about Hayes for years because they were afraid of what coming forward would cost them." "And what did he give you?" "The shape of the legal case," Jack said. "So I knew which information mattered and which didn't. So I wasn't wasting time getting him things he already had." She thought about the weeks of pressure, the tightening, the squeezing, the slow, methodical destruction of everything she had built. She thought about herself working alone in the garage at 2 in the morning, thinking she was fighting alone, while somewhere in Silver Creek, 2 men who should never have been in the same room were sitting across from each other and building something that could actually end it. "I wish you had told me," she said. Not with anger, just with the particular weariness of someone who had carried weight that could have been distributed. "I know," he said, "but you needed to be the public face of this, the person who fought openly. If it got out that you were coordinating with the people you were coordinating with, Hayes's lawyers would have used it. They would have reframed the whole thing, made you look like you had organized retaliation rather than suffered an attack." She understood it. She didn't love it, but she understood it. "Jack," she said, "what happens today?" He was quiet for a moment. "Today," he said, "you go to your garage, you open the doors and you work, same as every day." A pause. "And Mitchell does what Mitchell does." "That's not specific enough." "I know," he said, "but it's what I've got." She exhaled. "Fine," she said, "I'll see you at the garage." She pulled in at 6:45. There were still a dozen bikes on the street. Men and women who had stayed through the night, some of them sleeping on their bikes or against the wall, some of them still awake and drinking coffee from thermoses they had produced from somewhere. When she got out of her car, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a vest with patches down both arms looked at her and gave her a nod that carried the particular weight of someone who had made a deliberate choice to be somewhere and was not interested in being thanked for it. Madison nodded back. She unlocked the garage. She turned on the lights. She put on her coffee maker and her work boots, and she pulled up the day's schedule on the computer, and she started work. Frank came in at 7. He looked at the bikes still on the street, and then at her, and then at the bikes again. Hell of a night, he said. Hell of a night, she agreed. He poured himself coffee. You doing all right, he said. She thought about it honestly. I'm doing better than yesterday, she said, which is more than I could say for most of the past month. Frank nodded. He looked at the street again. Jack did that, he said. It wasn't a question. Jack did that, she confirmed. Frank was quiet for a moment. You know, he said, in 20 years of knowing that man, I have never once seen him do something like that for a stranger. She looked at him. She's not a stranger, said Jack's voice from the door. Both of them turned. Jack was standing at the entrance in the same vest, same boots, looking like a man who had been awake all night and had made his peace with it. He had coffee from somewhere, a gas station cup by the look of it. You're not a stranger, he said to Madison. You're Robert's daughter. That's a specific category. Frank made a sound that might have been agreement or might have been something more complicated. Madison went back to the engine she was working on, but something in the air of the garage had changed. Something had settled, not resolution exactly that wasn't here yet, but the feeling that the ground was solid, that whatever was coming, they were standing on something real. Mitchell called at 9:47. She was torquing a cylinder head when her phone buzzed on the workbench. She saw his name and set down the torque wrench immediately. Mitchell, she said. Are you sitting down? He said. No. We'll set. She sat on the nearest stool. Victor Hayes was arrested this morning, Mitchell said. 45 minutes ago, federal and state agents, his offices in Denver and his home in Cherry Hills. She heard the words. Her brain processed them. She didn't speak for a full 4 seconds. Federal, she said. The case grew onward, Mitchell said, and there was something in his voice she had never heard before, the sound of a man who had been working towards something for a very long time and had finally arrived at it. What started here connected to what happened in Pueblo, what happened outside Grand Junction, what happened to 2 properties in Boulder County. Federal involvement came in 3 weeks ago when the pattern crossed enough jurisdictions. 3 weeks ago, she said. You've known for 3 weeks. I've been coordinating for 3 weeks, he said carefully. I couldn't tell you because the operation couldn't be compromised. I'm sorry for that. She thought about the past 3 weeks, the city complaint Hayes had filed, the cameras Mitchell had asked her to install secretly, the text message the night before, the SUVs, the crowd of motorcycles. Last night, she said slowly. Was that? We were watching them, Mitchell said. The 3 vehicles. We had them tracked from the moment they entered Silver Creek. We needed them to make a move we could document. The cameras in and around your garage captured everything. And, he paused. The text message you received was sent by a man named Craig Dutton. He's Hayes' operations manager. He's been the one coordinating the ground-level harassment across multiple properties over 3 years. He was arrested this morning as well. She stared at the wall. Craig Dutton. She had never heard that name, but he was the one who had called her suppliers, her bank, her insurance company, the one who had dispatched the men who broke her equipment and damaged her customers' vehicles, the one who had organized the city complaint and the rumor campaign and the fake news article. A name, a real name attached to all of it. How many, she said. Hayes and 6 associates, Mitchell said. Arrests this morning. There will be more as the investigation continues. She realized her hand was shaking slightly. Not from fear, from something she had to think for a moment to identify. Relief, the particular kind of relief that comes from carrying something heavy for so long that you had stopped noticing the weight until it was suddenly not there. Mitchell, she said, what are the charges? Criminal intimidation, coordinated property destruction, fraud, attempted arson across multiple incidents, witness intimidation, and racketeering, he said. The racketeering charge is the federal one. It covers the pattern across all the properties. She looked across the garage at Jack. He was watching her face, reading it the way he read everything carefully, completely, without drama. She said into the phone, attempted arson, plural. The 2 fires that were ruled accidental, Mitchell said. We have a fire investigator who reviewed both and is prepared to testify that they were not accidental. Combined with the documentation from last night, the vehicles, the positioning, the threat, he stopped. He was going to burn your garage, Madison, and we caught him in the process of setting it up. She closed her eyes for a moment, 1 moment only, then she opened them. What happens next, she said. The legal process, Mitchell said. which takes time, but Hayes is in custody. His assets are frozen pending the investigation. His company's operations are suspended. A pause. He's not going to be calling anyone's suppliers for a long time. She thanked him. She didn't have words for more than that, and she thought he understood. She hung up. She looked at Jack. He's arrested, she said. Jack nodded once. Federal charges, she said. Racketeering, fraud, attempted arson. Jack's expression didn't change dramatically. He didn't whoop or pump his fist. He just nodded in the way of someone for whom this was not a surprise and for whom the moment was more complicated than simple celebration. Who else? He said quietly. 6 associates, including a man named Craig Dutton. Something in Jack's face changed slightly at that name. Recognition. You know that name, she said. Yes, he said. He's the one who ran the ground operation. The suppliers, the bank, the men he sent here. He paused. He's the one who lit the fires. She stared at him. You knew his name, she said. I'm the one who gave it to Mitchell, Jack said. The silence in the garage was complete. Frank had set down his coffee at some point during the phone call and was standing very still listening. Jack, Madison said carefully, how did you get that name? He looked at her steadily. Someone who knew him told me, he said. Someone who had worked in Hayes's organization and who had been wanting a way out of the situation for a long time. When I had a conversation with him, he found the door he'd been looking for. You flipped someone inside Hayes's operation, she said. I had a conversation, Jack said. The information that came out of that conversation went to Mitchell through a channel that had protected the source. Mitchell used it to build the connection between Dutton and the fires. He paused. That's what I mean when I say I made calls. It wasn't always about calling people I trusted. Sometimes it was about having the right conversation with the right person who wanted a reason to do the right thing. She sat with that. The full architecture of what Jack had done was only now becoming clear to her. Not just rallying people to stand in front of her garage. Not just calling suppliers and insurance companies to reverse course on Hayes's pressure, but actively penetrating the organization that was attacking her. Finding the person inside who was ready to break. Giving that person the conversation they needed to step through the door. 30 years of knowing how people worked. 30 years of understanding the particular pressures that made people talk and the particular conditions that made people brave. All of it focused on one small garage in one small Colorado town because her father had fixed a motorcycle one Saturday afternoon 31 years ago. She thought about what that meant. The scale of what one act of straightforward human decency had generated across 3 decades. Frank, she said without looking away from Jack. Yeah, Frank said. Did you know all of this when you came here? Frank was quiet for a moment. I knew Jack was handling it, Frank said. I didn't know every piece. He paused. I knew enough to trust him. Same as you eventually did. She nodded slowly. She turned back to the torque wrench on the workbench. She picked it up. She went back to the cylinder head. Jack and Frank both looked at her. What are you doing? Frank said. Working, she said. I have 3 cars to get through today and a customer coming at noon who's been patient for 2 weeks. The fact that Hayes is in handcuffs doesn't finish the work. A pause. Then Frank made the same sound he made when something struck him as exactly correct. He picked up his own tools. Jack sat down in his chair with his gas station coffee. And Carter's Classic Auto Repair opened for business on the morning that Victor Hayes was arrested, the same way it had opened every morning and for 22 years, the same way Madison intended to open it for 22 more. The call started coming at 11. Not the calls she had been making for weeks, going outward, calling customers and suppliers and the newspaper. These calls came in. They came in faster than she could return them, stacking up in her voicemail like something that had been held back and was now released all at once. Customers who had seen the news of the arrest, it had made the local news by mid-morning and the regional news by noon, calling to say they were coming back. Suppliers calling to say that whatever complications had affected her account were resolved. 2 businesses in neighboring towns calling to say they had experienced similar pressure campaigns and they wanted to talk. A lawyer calling not on Hayes's behalf but a civil attorney who had seen the arrest report and wanted to talk about the possibility of a damages case. The lawyer's name was Patricia Okafor. She was direct and precise and clearly skilled at covering a lot of ground quickly. The federal racketeering charges create a specific legal landscape for civil action, Okafor said. If Hayes and his associates are convicted, and based on what I'm seeing in the initial filings, the case is substantial. The victims of his campaign have meaningful grounds to pursue damages. What kind of damages? Madison said. Lost revenue during the period of the campaign, cost of repairs and equipment replacement, damage to business reputation. Pain and suffering, though, that's a harder number to put on. Okafor paused. The equipment alone, the parts delays the insurance, stalling the customer losses if we can document all of it. And it sounds like you've been documenting it. I have everything, Madison said. Every call, every date, every number. Then we have a conversation worth having, Okafor said. At your convenience. Madison took her number and said she'd call back. She stood for a moment with the phone in her hand. Damages, money, compensation for what the past months had cost her. She tried to decide how she felt about that and found the answer was more complicated than she expected. I'll be honest. Part of her wanted the accountability to be financial as well as legal. Wanted Victor Hayes to sit across from a number that represented what his greed had taken from her and know that he was going to pay it. That part was honest, and she wasn't ashamed of it. But another part of her knew that no dollar amount was going to give back the months of exhaustion, the nights of fear, the conversations with customers who had believed the lies the morning she had found the garage in pieces and sat on the floor in the wreckage of her father's work. Some things didn't have a price. Her father had known that. She went back to work. Dale came in that afternoon. Dale, who had been bringing his truck to Robert Carter for 15 years and who had received the phone call from the unknown number telling him the garage was having money problems. Dale, who had been one of the 19 customers she had called back on that first morning after Jack told her to. He came in without an appointment, which was not like him. Dale was a man who respected schedules. He came in just after 2 when the noon rush had settled, and he walked in with his hands in his pockets and an expression that Madison recognized as the face of someone who needed to say something they'd been carrying. I should have called you back sooner, he said. When you called me, I should have called you back the same day. You didn't know. Doesn't matter, he said. Your father never waited on me? Not once. When I had the transmission problem on the old Silverado, he worked through a weekend. When my wife needed the minivan back for the school run on a Tuesday, he came in early. Dale shook his head. I got one phone call from a stranger and I went quiet for 3 weeks. That's not the kind of man I want to be. She looked at him. Dale, she said, you came back. That's what matters. I came back because you called me, he said. You shouldn't have had to call. I should have called you the day I got that message and told you what was happening. She thought about that, about how different the past weeks might have been if people like Dale had called her the moment the unknown number started. How the rumor campaign might have unraveled in the first week instead of running for a month. But she also thought about how people worked, how fear and uncertainty made people hesitate, how it was easy to look back and see the clear choice and hard to see it in the moment when the information was partial and the stakes were unclear. Hayes counted on that, she said, the hesitation. He knew people would wait and wonder instead of calling. He built his whole strategy around it. Dale looked at her. And it almost worked, he said. Almost, she said. He booked his truck in for a service appointment and shook her hand before he left. The way her father's customers used to shake her father's hand, not like a transaction, but like something that meant something. She watched him go and felt the garage settle around her in a different way than it had settled in weeks. Quieter, more solid, less like a thing being defended and more like a thing simply being. Her phone buzzed at 3:15. Mitchell. She picked up. Hayes made a statement through his attorney, Mitchell said. What kind of statement? Denial across the board. Claims the arrests are politically motivated. His attorney is already talking about the strength of his defense. A pause. I want you to know that this is normal. This is what every person in this position does. It doesn't mean the case is weak. I know, she said. But there's something else, Mitchell said. And this part isn't public yet. So I'm telling you as a courtesy because you deserve to know before you see it on the news. He paused. One of the 6 associates arrested this morning has agreed to cooperate with prosecutors. She straightened. Dutton, she said. No, Mitchell said. Someone higher up. Someone who was part of the decision-making structure at Hayes Development Group. and who has documentary evidence of the planning that went into each of the targeted campaigns, including yours. Another pause. Including the instructions to arrange the fires. Her grip on the phone tightened. Instructions, she said, written instructions. Emails, Mitchell said. Internal communications. Specific instructions about how to handle properties where owners refused to sell and where the pressure campaign had not been sufficient. He stopped. Madison, Hayes didn't just organize what happened to you, he documented it. His organization was so confident that no one would ever put the whole picture together that they operated with a paper trail. She closed her eyes. The arrogance of it, the absolute total arrogance of a man so accustomed to operating without consequence that he had written down what he was doing. That's the case, she said. That's the case, Mitchell confirmed. That's why the federal involvement was possible. You can't build a racketeering charge on pattern alone. You need documentation, and Hayes' own organization gave it to us. She opened her eyes. How long, she said, for the trial? These things move slowly, Mitchell said. Months, probably more than a year before it goes to trial. But the pre-trial detention argument is strong given the flight risk profile. He's not going to be walking around making offers to people in the meantime. She nodded to herself. Mitchell, she said, I want to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. All right, he said. Jack, she said, the information he gave you, the name, the source inside Hayes' operation. When this goes to trial, is any of that going to be an issue? A pause, Bumaremus. The information Jack provided led me to a source, Mitchell said carefully. That source provided information and evidence through official channels. The chain of evidence is clean, how the source was originally identified. He stopped. That's not something that will come up in court. You made sure of that, she said. I built the case correctly, he said. That's my job. She understood what he was saying and what he was not saying. Thank you, she said. You did the hard part, he said. You stayed open. Jack left Silver Creek on a Friday. He told her on Thursday afternoon, the same casual way he told her most things, not dramatically, not with a long lead-up, just directly the way he handled everything. I'm heading out tomorrow morning, he said. He was in his usual chair with his usual coffee, watching her work on a '68 Mustang that a customer had brought in for a restoration, the kind of job that required patience and precision and the willingness to let the car tell you what it needed rather than imposing your own ideas on it. She stopped what she was doing. She turned and looked at him. Already, she said. Things are settled, he said. The legal process is running. Mitchell has what he needs. The garage is full. He looked at the appointments board, which had not had an empty slot in a week. Your father's customers came back, and some new ones. She set down the wrench. She stood with her hands on her hips and looked at him and tried to organize what she wanted to say, which was several things at once, and didn't resolve into a single clean statement. I don't know how to thank you, she said finally, and I know that you don't want me to try too hard, but I need to say something. He waited. You could have walked away, she said. My father helped you 31 years ago. He's gone now. Nobody would have known. You could have driven past Silver Creek and never stopped, and nobody would have counted it against you. I would have, he said. I know, she said. That's what I mean. You came here because of who you are, not because of any debt. The debt gave you a reason to show up. But everything you did once you were here, that was a choice. He looked at her. Your father made a choice 31 years ago, he said, on a Saturday afternoon when he could have gone home. He chose to stay and help someone who needed it. That choice had a shape. It went somewhere. He paused. Choices like that don't just end when the moment is over. They keep going. They become things. He looked around the garage at Frank working across the room at the Mustang, on the lift, at the appointments board, at the sign above the entrance. This is what that choice became. She looked at the sign, the uneven letters, her father's handwriting made permanent. He'd have wanted to meet you again, she said. He'd have wanted to sit with you and drink terrible coffee and hear what you've been doing for 30 years. Jack smiled. It was the fullest smile she had seen from him, reaching his eyes, changing his whole face. He'd have told me my bike needed new tires, he said. She laughed. It came out surprised and genuine. The laugh of someone who hadn't laughed much in a while and had forgotten how quickly it could arrive. He absolutely would have, she said. They were quiet for a moment. A good quiet, the kind that didn't need filling. One thing, Jack said. What? The young mechanics, he said. You mentioned to Frank that you were thinking about hiring, bringing in some trainees. I've been thinking about it, she said. There are kids in this town who need a trade and can't afford to go to technical school. He nodded. Do it, he said. That's the thing your father would have done next. That's the move that keeps this place alive for another 20 years. He paused. People remember who teaches them. They remember it the way I remembered your father. She thought about that. A 16-year-old kid with no direction and a willingness to get his hands dirty, walking into this garage learning something real and lasting. Coming back 20 years later when that kid needed something. The ripples, the way things went forward. Okay, she said. He stood up. He put his coffee cup in the trash. He looked at the photograph on the office wall, the one she had moved from the desk back to its proper place with the others. The old photo slightly faded. Her father and a young man with dark hair standing beside a motorcycle. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned. Take care of the sign, he said. The one above the door. Don't ever repaint it. I know, she said. He put out his hand. She looked at it for a moment, then stepped forward and did something he hadn't expected. She hugged him. Brief and certain, though, hug of someone who knew what they were doing and why. He was still for half a second. Then he put one hand on her shoulder and accepted it with the kind of grace of a man who had learned that some moments required you to receive what was being given. She stepped back. Your shovelhead's going to need the rear wheel bearing looked at in about 2,000 miles, she said. He nodded seriously. I'll bring it back, he said. I'll be here, she said. He walked out. She heard the Harley start. That deep, unhurried rumble that she knew now as well as any engine she had ever worked on. She didn't go to the door. She stayed at the workbench and listened to it idle for a moment, then shift, then pull away the sound moving down the street, and then away getting smaller and cleaner with distance until it was gone. Frank came to stand beside her. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. They went back to work. 3 weeks after the arrest, Patricia Okafor filed the civil suit. Madison had met with her twice, once in her office and once at the garage, because Madison had wanted Okafor to see the space and understand what she was representing. Okafor had walked through the garage with the same cataloging attention she brought to everything, and at the end she had stood in the center of the space and said simply, I understand what this place is. I'll represent it accordingly. The suit named Hayes Development Group, Victor Hayes, personally Craig Dutton, and 4 other named individuals. It sought damages for lost revenue, equipment, destruction, reputational harm, and what the filing called coordinated economic terrorism against a family-owned business, a phrase that Okafor had chosen carefully and that Mitchell had told Madison was exactly accurate. The night after the suit was filed, Madison sat alone in the garage after closing. She did this sometimes now, not because she was afraid to go home, not because the numbers were keeping her up, but because the garage was her father's and she was his, and sitting in it after hours with the tools quiet and the work done and the next day's appointments already written on the board felt like the closest thing she had to a conversation with him. She sat in his chair. She looked at the photographs on the wall. She looked at the one at the end, the slightly faded one of him and young Jack by the motorcycle, and she thought about chains. Not chains like imprisonment, chains like connection. The way one link held to the next and the next to the next, forward and backward through time. Her father had learned to work from his father. He had taught her. She was about to start teaching the first of what she hoped would be many young mechanics who came through these doors without a trade and left with one. Robert Carter had helped a young man on a Saturday afternoon. That young man had become someone who moved in the world with the authority of a man who kept his word, absolutely. And when someone threatened what was left of Robert Carter's work, that man had made one phone call that became hundreds of motorcycles standing in the dark. She thought about what Frank had said. In 20 years of knowing that man, I have never once seen him do something like that for a stranger. But she wasn't a stranger. She was Robert's daughter. And Robert Carter, it turned out, had built something that went a lot further than the walls of a garage in Silver Creek, Colorado. He had built trust, and trust, unlike buildings, didn't burn. Her phone buzzed, a text from a number she had saved 3 weeks ago and had expected never to hear from again. Wheel bearing held up, New Mexico, and then after a pause, your father would be proud. She stared at the message for a long moment. Then she typed back, I know. Thank you, Jack. She set the phone down. She sat in her father's chair in her father's garage, surrounded by her father's photographs. And for the first time since he died, she felt something that was not grief and not an absence, but something different, something warmer, something that felt, if she was being honest, like presence, like he was still in the room. Not in the way of hauntings or wishful thinking, in the way of people who build things that last, who make choices that ripple forward, who help people not because it's useful, but because it's right, and who trust that rightness has a way of returning to the place it started. She reached up and turned off the desk lamp. She sat in the dark for a moment. Then she stood, put on her jacket, and walked to the door. She stopped underneath the sign. She looked up at it in the low light from the street, the slightly uneven letters, her father's hand. 22 years of weather and 3 years of her, and still hanging there above the entrance, still saying the same thing it had always said. Carter's Classic Auto Repair. Not a trophy, not a monument, a working garage. One that opened every morning and did honest work and charged fair prices and turned no one away. One that when the world had tried to take it, had turned out to have more friends than anyone had counted on. She smiled. She turned off the last light. She locked the door, and she went home. The trial date was set for 14 months after the arrest. Madison knew this because Mitchell called her on a Tuesday morning in late October, 9 months after Victor Hayes had been walked out of his Cherry Hills home in handcuffs, and told her that the federal prosecutor's office had confirmed the schedule. 14 months. She wrote it on the calendar above her workbench the same way she wrote service appointments and oil change reminders in pen, certain not subject to revision. How are you feeling about it? Mitchell asked. She thought about the question honestly. Ready, she said. I've been ready since the night they tried to burn it down. You may be called to testify, he said. Okafor will prep you, but I wanted you to hear the timeline from me first. I appreciate that, she said. The cooperating witness, Mitchell said, has been solid. Everything he provided has held up to scrutiny. The emails, the internal communications, the documented instructions. The prosecution's case is as strong as anything I've seen in 20 years. He paused. Hayes's lawyers are going to argue the documents were misrepresented. They're going to argue their client had no direct knowledge of the methods his organization used. That's their strategy. Will it work? She said. No, Mitchell said. It was the most direct she had ever heard him. No hedge, no qualification. Just no. The paper trail is too specific. There are emails with his name in the header giving direct authorization. His lawyers know it. They're going to try anyway because that's what lawyers do, but they know. She nodded to herself. 14 months, she said. 14 months, and he confirmed. In the meantime, how's the garage? She looked at the appointments board. Every slot filled for the next 3 weeks. 2 new mechanics she had hired in August, both of them under 25, both of them learning the way she had learned by doing, by listening, by being corrected without being humiliated. A waiting list for restoration work that stretched into the following spring. The garage, she said, is doing fine. She could hear him smiling through the phone. Good, he said. Your father would be. I know, she said. Thank you, Mitchell. She hung up and went back to work. The 2 young mechanics were named Danny and Keisha. Danny Reyes was 22, the son of a mechanic from Pueblo, who had closed his shop the year before when the rent tripled and the landlord wouldn't negotiate. He had grown up under cars the way Madison had, and he had the particular combination of patience and instinct that couldn't be taught. It either came with a person or it didn't. He had shown up the week after Madison posted a handwritten notice in the window saying she was looking for a trainee who wanted to learn the right way. He was the 4th person who knocked. He was the one she hired. Keisha Brown was 20 from Silver Creek itself, and she had come to Madison through a different road entirely. Her mother had brought her car in for a coolant flush, and Keisha had come along and spent the entire hour watching Madison work with an expression of focused interest that Madison recognized from her own mirror. Before the car was done, Madison had offered her a part-time position. 3 months later, it was full-time. Keisha had a gift for diagnostics that Madison had rarely seen outside of people who had been doing this for decades. She could hear something in an engine that most people couldn't hear at all. Madison had tested it once deliberately without telling her by running a car with a specific intermittent fault and asking Keisha to listen. She had identified it in under 2 minutes and described it with a precision that made Frank look up from across the garage. Frank had looked at Madison afterward and said, "She's going to be better than both of us." Madison had said, "That's the point. Teaching them was not always easy." Danny had a tendency towards shortcuts that came from years of watching his father work under time pressure, and Madison had to redirect it firmly and regularly without breaking his confidence in himself, which was already fragile in the way of young men who had watched their fathers fail at something they loved. Keisha's challenge was different. She was precise and exacting, and sometimes got locked into a problem in a way that consumed more time than the problem merited, because she needed to understand not just the solution, but every possible reason the problem had occurred. Madison remembered being the same way at 20 and remembered her father sitting beside her and saying, "Sometimes the car needs to be done by Tuesday, Maddie. You can understand it completely after that." She said the same thing to Keisha one afternoon, almost word for word. Keisha looked at her. "Did your dad tell you that?" she said. "Yes," Madison said. Keisha considered it. "Okay," she said, and went back to the car and had it done by 3 o'clock. These were the days, the actual daily texture of the thing that had been fought for, not the dramatic nights, not the confrontations, not the moment hundreds of motorcycles filled the street. The ordinary days. Danny learning to read a torque spec correctly. Keisha talking through a transmission rebuild with a precision that made customers feel immediately confident. Frank teaching both of them the shortcuts that were acceptable and the shortcuts that were not. Madison standing in the middle of it, her father's garage humming around her, and feeling the particular satisfaction of something that was both exactly what it had always been and also growing into something more. One afternoon in November, about 2 weeks after Mitchell's call, she found Danny standing in front of the photograph wall in the office. He was looking at the old photograph, the one of her father and Jack. "Who are they?" he said when she came in. "That's my father," she said, "when he was young, and a friend of his." Danny studied it. "Your dad looks like he knew what he was doing," he said. She smiled. "He did," she said, "from the time he was about your age." She paused. "He didn't always know what was going to happen, but he knew what he was doing. There's a difference." Danny turned and looked at her. "Is that something you learn?" He said, or is it something you either have or you don't?" She thought about it genuinely, the way she tried to think about all of his questions genuinely, because he was at the age where the answers you got shaped the questions you kept asking. "You learn it by making decisions and living with them," she said. "Good ones and bad ones. The difference between people who develop it and people who don't is whether they pay attention to the consequences." She paused. "Your father paid attention. He just ran out of room eventually. That's not the same as not knowing what he was doing." Danny looked at the photograph again. "Okay," he said quietly. He went back to the floor. She stood in the office for a moment and looked at the photograph herself. 22 years of her father, 3 years of her, and now Danny and Keisha learning under the same roof with the same tools, with the same principle, driving everything do the work, honestly charge what it's worth, and turn no one away. The chain held. Then, Jack came back in December. She was not entirely surprised. He had said he would, and Jack Callahan, she had learned, said exactly what he meant and meant exactly what he said. No more and no less. He pulled up on a Thursday morning just before 10, the Harley sounding exactly as she had told him it would. The rear wheel bearing had developed the particular complaint she had diagnosed back in September, a low rhythmic groan that was not yet urgent but was not going to get better on its own. He came in and looked around the garage, and she watched his face move through something she had learned to read in him, that cataloging, expression-taking inventory, checking the state of things against what he remembered and what he had expected. He saw Danny first. Danny was underneath a Ford F250, visible only from the boots down. The sound of his work was confident and unhurried. Then he saw Keisha, who was at the computer running a diagnostic readout, and frowning at the screen in the particular way that meant she was about to identify something interesting. Jack looked at Madison. She nodded at the two of them, a small gesture, an answer to the question he hadn't asked aloud. He sat down in his chair. His chair. She had stopped thinking of it as the customer waiting chair. It was Jack's chair. She had accepted that as a fact of the garage, the way she had accepted the sign in the photographs and the slightly uneven floor in the third bay. "Bearing," he said. "Bearing," she confirmed. "I'll get to it after lunch. Give me 2 hours." He nodded. He picked up a magazine. He settled in. Keisha noticed him at 11 and came to Madison quietly. "Who is that?" she said. "Friend of the family," Madison said. Keisha looked at him again. "He comes in a lot when he's passing through," Madison said. Keisha studied him for another moment. She had the same attention for people that she had for engines, that focused diagnostic quality looking for the signal beneath the noise. "He's the one from the photograph," she said, "isn't he?" Madison looked at her. "What makes you say that?" "The way he sits," Keisha said, "like he's watching everything and not worried about any of it." She paused. "Your dad had the same thing in that picture. The same posture." She looked at Madison. "Settled. That's the word. He looks settled." Madison looked at Jack in his chair. Settled. It was exactly the right word. "Yes," she said. "He's the one from the photograph." Keisha nodded like this confirmed something she had already decided and went back to her diagnostic screen. Platinum. At lunch, Madison brought Jack a sandwich from the place across the street, the same diner her father had ordered from every Friday for 20 years and sat across from him. He unwrapped the sandwich without looking at it and said, "Tell me about the trial." She told him everything Mitchell had told her. The timeline, the cooperating witness, the emails with Hayes' name on them, the prosecution's confidence, Hayes' lawyers and their strategy, and why Mitchell thought it wouldn't hold. Jack listened the way he always listened, completely without interrupting, without the small sounds of acknowledgement that most people made to signal they were still following. He just listened until she was done. "The witness," he said, "is he protected?" "Federal program," she said. "Yes," Jack nodded. She looked at him. "You're worried about the witness," she said. "Hayes has resources," Jack said. "Even with frozen assets, a man like that has contingencies." He paused. "But if the prosecution has the documentation, the emails, the witness is icing. They don't need him for the core of the case." "That's what Mitchell says," she said. "Mitchell's right," Jack said. He picked up the sandwich and ate it with the unhurried attention he brought to everything. "You talked to him again," Madison said. "Last week," Jack said. "He called me." She raised an eyebrow. "Mitchell called you," she said. "He wanted to know if I'd heard anything from the Hayes side," Jack said, "about the trial preparation, whether there was any movement he should know about." "And I told him what I knew," Jack said simply, "which wasn't much. Hayes has been quiet. His organization has been quiet. Quieter than you'd expect for a man preparing a defense." He paused and set down the sandwich. "That concerns me more than noise would." She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "A man who is panicking makes noise," Jack said. "Lawyers filing motions, calling witnesses, building counter-narratives in the press. A man who has gone quiet is either resigned or he's doing something you can't see yet." She felt the familiar, cold thing begin to move. "You think he has something," she said. "I think it's worth paying attention to," Jack said. "I'm not saying the case is compromised. I'm saying watch the quiet." She called Mitchell that afternoon. She told him what Jack had said. Mitchell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "He's not wrong. We've noticed the same thing. Hayes' team filed 3 motions in the first 2 months and then went almost completely silent for the last 6 weeks." A pause. "Wow. We're watching it." "And," she said, "and so far, there's nothing concrete," Mitchell said. "But we're watching it." She hung up and went back to the garage and worked until 6 when Danny and Keisha had gone home and Frank had locked up the back and it was just her and the Harley in the quiet. She looked at the Harley. She thought about what Jack had said. Watch the quiet. She had spent months being afraid of what was coming normally, the men who broke her equipment, the vehicles parked in the dark, the threat that arrived by text message at 11:30 at night. She knew how to handle the loud things. She had learned. But the quiet things were harder. The quiet things came when you weren't braced for them. The twist came in January, not from Hayes' legal team, not from a court filing or a prosecutor's arm. It came from a woman named Sandra Reeves who walked into Carter's Classic Auto Repair on a Wednesday morning and asked for Madison by name. Sandra Reeves was 58, recently retired from a corporate attorney position at a firm in Denver, and she had the particular bearing of a woman who had spent 30 years in rooms where she was the only woman and had long ago stopped needing anyone to adjust for that fact. She sat down across from Madison in the office. "I worked for Hayes Development Group for 11 years, she said. "Not as part of the criminal enterprise. as a legitimate corporate attorney handling legitimate commercial transactions. She paused. I left the firm 8 months ago. I left because of what I found out. Madison kept her face still. What did you find out? She said. That several transactions I had handled as legitimate commercial purchases were preceded by exactly what happened to you, Sandra said. I didn't know it at the time. I was handed clean deals sellers who had agreed to sell at market price everything in order. I didn't know the sellers had been coerced into agreeing. But you know now, Madison said. I know now, Sandra said, because I went back through my files when the arrest was made, and I identified 7 additional transactions that fit the pattern. 7 properties, 7 families that I did not know about when I was processing the deals. She looked at Madison steadily. I have those files, and I have been trying to decide for 8 months what to do with them. Madison looked at her. What made you decide? She said. Sandra Reeves looked at her hands for a moment. I read about you, she said. The article, what happened, the arrest, the civil suit. She paused. I have a daughter, she's 26. She wants to open a business. She stopped. I decided I didn't want to be the kind of person my daughter would have to make excuses for. The garage was very quiet. Madison picked up her phone and called Patricia Okafor. I need you to come to the garage, she said. Today, if possible. I have someone here you need to meet. Okafor arrived in 40 minutes. She and Sandra Reeves sat in the office for 2 hours. Madison stayed for the first 15 minutes, then went to the floor and worked because the legal conversation was not hers to be part of, and because work was how she processed things too large for immediate understanding. When Okafor finally came out, her expression was contained in the specific way of a litigator who had just received something significant and was not going to show how significant on her face until she had fully assessed it. This changes the scope of the civil case, Okafor said. How much? Madison said. 7 additional properties, Okafor said. 7 additional families. 7 additional sets of documented losses connected to the same organization. She paused. And a direct witness to the existence of those transactions from inside the firm. Madison stared at her. Sandra Reeves just handed us the civil case against the entire operation, she said. That is an accurate characterization, Okafor said. Madison turned away for a moment. She needed a second. She took it. Then she turned back. The families, she said. The other 7. Do you have their names? Some of them, Okafor said. Find all of them, Madison said. I want to call them. She paused. They've been sitting with this alone. I know what that feels like. I want them to know they're not alone anymore. Okafor looked at her for a moment. I'll get you the names, she said. She called them over the following 2 weeks. 7 families, 7 stories that were different in their details and identical in their shape. The pressure, the rumors, the suppliers, the banks, the insurance companies, the offers that kept coming after the no. The moment things turned physical or financial or both. The sale that had felt less like a decision and more like the last option standing after all other options had been taken away. Every call was hard. Every call mattered. She didn't call to recruit them to the lawsuit. Okafor was handling that carefully and professionally. She called because she knew what it felt like to have gone through what they went through and believed you were the only one it had happened to. The particular isolation of that belief. The way it made you doubt yourself, made you wonder if you had done something to bring it on, made the whole thing feel like a personal failure rather than a targeted crime. She called to tell them it wasn't their fault. She called to tell them there were others. She called to tell them that the man who had done it to them was in federal custody, facing a racketeering charge supported by his own emails, and that a corporate attorney who had unknowingly processed his dirty deals had walked into a garage in Silver Creek and handed over the files that were going to make the civil case unwinnable for his lawyers. The reactions were different on every call. Some cried, some went very quiet. One man, the owner of the lumberyard outside Pueblo, that Bill Garrett had told her about a man named Thomas Waller, who had sold after his heart attack and lived with the shame of it for 3 years, listened to everything she said without speaking, and then said in a voice that was very controlled and very old, I thought I failed my father. He built that yard. I sold it from a hospital bed. You didn't fail him, she said. You were attacked. There's a difference. He was quiet. Thomas, she said, Victor Hayes wrote emails authorizing what he did to you. We have them. He is going to stand in front of a federal judge and answer for it, not just for what he did to me, For what he did to you. She paused. Your father's yard mattered. What happened to it was a crime, and the man who committed that crime is not going to get away with it. A long silence. Thank you, he said it finally. His voice had changed. Still old, but something in it had loosened. She hung up and sat at the workbench and pressed her hands flat against the surface and breathed. This was what the fight had been for. Not just the garage, not just the sign and the photographs and the appointments board full of names. This. 7 other families, 22 years of someone else's work that had been taken. The man in the hospital bed who had believed for 3 years that he had failed. He hadn't failed. He had been a victim of a crime. And now, because Madison Carter had refused to sell when Victor Hayes came to her garage and told her everyone sold eventually because she had stayed open and stayed visible, and fought on every front simultaneously, and trusted a man in a leather vest who had kept a 31-year-old promise. Because of all of that, Thomas Waller's lumberyard was going to be named in a federal racketeering case, and its loss was going to cost Victor Hayes more than he had ever planned to spend. She picked up her phone and called Jack. He answered on the second ring the way he always did. 7 more families, she said. A former attorney from inside Hayes's firm walked into my garage today with 11 years of files. A silence. 7, he said. 7 documented additional cases, she said. All the same pattern. It all connected to the same organization. Okafor says it changes everything. Another silence. Longer. When Jack spoke, his voice was quieter than usual. Something in it she hadn't heard from him before. Your father, he said. I know, she said. He would. I know, she said again. They were quiet together for a moment. The kind of quiet that had a shape to it, that meant something. Is the bearing holding up, she said. A short sound from him, almost a laugh. Bearing's fine, he said, for now. Come back when it starts complaining again, she said. Don't wait until it's urgent. I'll come back, he said, and she knew he would. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Madison testified on the 4th day. She had prepared with the Okafor for 6 hours the week before, going through every possible question, every attack line Hayes's lawyers might use, every way they might try to reframe her experience as a business failure rather than a targeted crime. She had prepared until she could answer anything from any angle without losing the thread of what was true. When she sat in the witness box, she was not afraid. She was 30 years old and she was her father's daughter, and she had spent the last 14 months running a garage training, 2 mechanics, fighting a civil suit, calling 7 families, and building the next chapter of something that had been in her family for 22 years. Fear was a luxury she didn't have time for. Hayes's lawyer spent 40 minutes trying to establish that the damage to the garage could have been the result of unrelated criminal activity, that the supplier disruptions were market-related, that the bank review was routine, that Hayes's offer had been legitimate and his follow-up visits appropriate business practice. She answered every question clearly and specifically, and with the dates, times, and exact words she had written down the day after each event, because Mitchell had told her to document everything, and she had completely without exception. When the prosecutor stood for redirect and asked her a single question, Ms. Carter, in your view, what was Victor Hayes trying to accomplish? She looked at the jury and gave the answer she had known since the night she sat on the floor of her father's wrecked garage. He was trying to make me give up, she said. He believed that if he took away enough the equipment and the customers, the money, the sense of safety, I'd have nothing left to hold on to. He didn't understand that the thing I was holding on to wasn't any of those things. She paused. It was my father's name on the door. You can't take that. The jury was out for 9 hours. They came back with guilty on all counts. Criminal intimidation, property destruction, fraud, attempted arson, multiple counts. Racketeering, Craig Dutton separately pled guilty 3 days before the verdict to avoid trial. He was sentenced to 11 years. Victor Hayes received 16 years in federal prison. Mitchell called her the evening the sentence was handed down. 16 years, she said. 16 years, he confirmed, and the civil settlement talks open this morning. With the criminal conviction, his lawyers are no longer fighting the premise of the civil case. They're negotiating. What are they offering? Not enough yet, he said. Okafor is handling it. She'll get there. She nodded. Mitchell, she said, when this started, when you came to my garage that first night, did you know how big it was? A pause. I knew it was bigger than it looked, he said. I didn't know how much bigger. He was quiet for a moment. I've been doing this 23 years. I've worked a lot of cases where the right outcome didn't happen because the person at the center of it stopped fighting before we got there. He paused. You didn't stop. No, she said. That mattered, he said, more than anything else. All the evidence, all the coordination, all of it. It only worked because you were still standing when we needed you to be. She looked at the garage around her. Danny had gone home. Keisha was finishing up the last car of the day, working with the absorbed focus that Madison had stopped trying to rush because it produced results that justified the time. Frank was in the back. The appointments board showed 3 weeks of work. Thank you, she said, for being someone worth trusting. Thank you for the same, he said. She told Danny and Keisha about the verdict the next morning. She gathered them at the workbench, Frank already there with coffee, all 4 of them in a circle, the way she and her father used to stand at the start of a day, and she told them simply and directly. Danny listened with his arms crossed and his jaw tight, the way he held himself when something mattered too much for casual expression. Keisha said 16 years. 16 years, Madison confirmed. Keisha looked at the garage, at the walls and the tools, and the sign visible through the window above the entrance. So it's done, she said. The criminal part is done, Madison said. The civil case is ongoing. But yes, the part where Victor Hayes could hurt this garage, that part is done. Keisha nodded slowly. What does that feel like, she said, not asking to be polite, asking because she genuinely wanted to know. Madison thought about it. She thought about this night in the wrecked garage when she sat on the floor. She thought about the 19 phone calls, the article, the 2 in the morning conversations and the cameras no one knew about, and the text message that came at 11:30, and the sounds she heard through the phone before she understood what it was. She thought about hundreds of motorcycles on a dark Colorado street. She thought about a woman named Sandra Reeves who didn't want to be the kind of person her daughter would have to make excuses for. She thought about Thomas Waller saying, I thought I failed my father. It feels like the first day of something, she said. Not the end, the first day. Keisha looked at her for a long moment. Then she picked up her tools and went to work. Danny followed. Frank caught Madison's eye and gave her the small nod he reserved for things that didn't need words. She tied on her work apron. She walked to the floor. And Carter's Classic Auto Repair opened for business on the morning after Victor Hayes was sentenced to 16 years in federal prison, the same way it had opened on every morning for 23 years, with the lights on the doors unlocked and honest work waiting to be done. The sign above the entrance still hung exactly as Robert Carter had painted it, slightly uneven, entirely his, visible from halfway down the block. It had survived a pressure campaign, a break-in, a rumor mill, a financial squeeze, a near arson, a federal trial, and 23 Colorado winters. It was still there, and so was she. Some things, it turned out, were simply stronger than the forces sent to destroy them. Not because they were invulnerable, not because the people who held them never felt afraid, but because the people who held them understood something that men like Victor Hayes would never understand, no matter how many years they had to sit with it. You cannot buy what was built with love. You cannot burn down what was built with truth. And when you come for a legacy that a good man spent his life building, when you send your men in the dark and your rumors in the daylight and your threats at 11:30 at night, you had better be absolutely certain that the person holding it has no one who will stand beside them. Because if you are wrong about that, only one thing is certain. The world will remember what happened to you, and the garage will still be open on Monday morning.